A system failure causes a truck to get stuck on an active rail line, with a train fast approaching, it being up to this man in green to save them. Probably would do a better job at it, and with more time to spare if he wasn't just, standing there. This is Rika, Searchman's expected operator, military officer, and net saver from Sharo, who gets Searchman in and deleting the problem in 10 seconds flat, before even Rockman can show up to deal with it. Did none of the other bystanders have navies by which to do this themselves? Want to do their civic duty and help? No? See, this is why Neto got the net saver job. And sure enough, he did see the incident as it was happening, and decided to intercede, as he explains as he arrives for a meeting at Scilab. Which is why Hiroyuki has never played a bombastic character ever, despite his name, if written with the correct kanji, being translatable as Brave Hero. The closest he's gotten is Drill Boy in J-Decker, Tekkaman Dead End in Tekkaman Blade 2, or the biological CPU Clotho Brewer in Gundam Seed, where he was a glorified taxi driver for the Calamity Gundam while he piloted the Raider. Normally the guy does support character roles like Makoto Hyuga in Evangelion, with him playing Rika, starting with this episode, actually being his second longest and most seen in a series recurring role, only topped by Omi Tsukiyono in Weiss Cruise. Rika is here for training, both to give and receive. Since Neto's been the vanguard for the anti-Darkloid efforts, he can thus learn what's effective against them, and also to help guide the younger Neto in some battle tactics he just doesn't see due to youth. Or at least that was the purported intent. But Rika and Neto's personalities end up clashing rather heavily, as Rika is hyper-focused on the job in a way that just is not healthy. Then again, Rika is from his country's military, so there is a level of strictness expected. But as I said in Battle Network 4, it is ridiculous to expect a soldier's level of self-discipline to be present from not only civilians, but children. Though to be fair to this incarnation, Rika does not start out like that kind of asshole. He's mostly cordial, right up until the point he has cross-fusion demonstrated to him, as he deems it a pointless tool. See, they've tried that. And well, you've not had to deal with fighting a guy that has torches that can melt steel built into him, or the rabid animal, or the guy that can drop a bowling ball the size of a house on you. And they have had zero luck shutting down the dimensional area converters while they are independently active. So it's not like you could just send a Navi in to do that, or use the converter themselves to realize their partner Navis in the real world, since they can't figure out how to do that. Especially since doing any type of esoteric tactic leaves the person pulling that off more exposed to unnecessary risk themselves. Sometimes the best solution to deal with a crisis is a simple one, and that means fighting the enemy on their terms through a direct confrontation, which the synchro chips in this series allows for. Any competent strategist and tactician knows that's sometimes required, and the best way to go about doing so is finding a way to flip the script in your favor, which normally is by the use of battle chips in this universe. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong for them to consider other alternatives outside of cross-fusion, since there are only 2 people who can currently use it, and they're both preteens. And Rika suggesting to do so actually does pay off later. But the way it's delivered is key to why being less of an asshole is part of Rika's longer character arc, helped by him getting a synchro chip of his own in Rockman's stream. For Rika's one that believes in having faith in one's own skills and trained abilities above all others. That reliance on others who can fail in the field can be a weakness, as it's placing your own ability to achieve a goal in the hands of someone or thing you have no control over. That you can only rely on faith and hope that they will pull their own weight, and people can let you down at the worst times when you may need support. Someone in the military, where the military-industrial complex and human error can cause so much unnecessary loss of life, with that context, Rika's viewpoint is legitimate. And not help that, again, Neto is a civilian child who isn't known for being disciplined, and Rika's only had a limited interaction with him, so how is he supposed to know that Neto saved the world twice already, and has a history of being a dependable person when the chips are down? Outside of, as always, when certain writers on the show decide to write him as a meritless idiot, which Masaharu Amiya thus far hasn't been, having written the previous netbowling episode and Searchman's solo introduction episode. And keep in mind with this, all of that characterization I just spouted about Rika, it's all in the subtextual stuff. How you read how he acts in context to who he is, his backstory, and how he acts with those around them. And you can't really say that Neto's being a jerk about this either to inform why Rika would be dismissive to his ability. In fact, this is one of the episodes where Neto is at his most self-aware of his shortcomings. Rika has just not been in a situation where he'd see the prevalent need for the tech, in part because it's not exactly something that can be made standard issue with the Navi synchronization requirement. It's only when he starts insulting Neto's intelligence for wanting to use a screwdriver to put in place a screw do things get more antagonistic between them. Not helped in this case by the Dark Lord of the Week being the sycophantic VideoMan, allowing Studios back to do a few famous film parodies, including a riff on the Bond movie opening gunfire sequence, The Matrix's bullet time, Kiki's delivery service, and so on. VideoMan throwing the local system servers for a loop to try bringing theatrical effect to life for the audience. VideoMan is surprisingly happy about killing the radio star. Neto and Rika are deployed to deal with him, Rika insisting on showing what he means by fighting with one's head first, showcased by Rika using Searchman to open a locked door, while Neto just bashes another open with a sledgehammer. Okay, this is a bad example, considering Neto has used Rockman that way to open locked doors before, not to mention his net saver authority to get around security locks in the event of emergencies like this. The only reason he'd need to bash a door like that open is if the security system were analog, i.e. there being no electric lock on it, only a physical one. Thus, it's a very bad use of execution contrast, as Rika's way is the only way Neto would normally use. And worse, this pissing contest Rika's engendered is putting people in danger, as VideoMan literally turns up the heat on them, due to the whole event splitting the party when they could be working together to resolve it, especially since VideoMan's ability to copy film effects can be pretty terrifying, especially when the effects in the film can be truly brought to life. What was that supposed to be? Neto cross fuses, VideoMan having missed their chance to interrupt it, while Rika continues to insist he can't fight without need of it and gets all the viruses VideoMan summoned to chase him while Neto is occupied with a tape deck bearing a god complex. Man, it's a good thing superconductor electromagnetism entirely wipes videotapes, otherwise he'd be using it to fly all over the place and shock our heroes. VideoMan's voice actor Tomomichi Nishimura is most known for playing D. Vega, aka M. Bison, in the Street Fighter games and anime. Not sure if he did voiceover for the live-action movie for the Japanese dub, but he probably did. But yeah, Rika's means of fighting here are to use the same virus diversion tactics that Neto has already used previously to avoid and temporarily disable viruses from pursuing him or others, while Searchman pins down the real physical location of the dimensional converters and leads Rika to the closest one, while Neto in turn has something of a difficult time with VideoMan. After all, videotape was even in the 2000s moving towards being an anachronistic technology. Thus, in all-digital world like Neto, he's basically the equivalent of a kid now. Thus doesn't know or realize that the best way to deal with a tape deck monster is to get it soaking wet as it ruins the quality of the tape. Then again, you could still probably get that logic from adhesive tape and relating it that way, simply due to the name. But they weren't exactly the same thing, especially since film reels sometimes did need to be developed by processing them with liquids before it would be in any shape to be usable. I don't know, it's just not a lot of people realize the effect moisture has on film, unless they've watched a lot of lost film documentaries, such as the one concerning the missing Doctor Who episode mess, where it's unlikely to find any more of them due to how old the film stock is, and how quickly film quality degrades if it's not stored properly. But yeah, VideoMan mad over that. Please, you just haven't tried hard enough. But yeah, this is kind of an excuse plot made to prove Rika's points. But it also falters in that, as how Rika saves Neto from this is using Searchman's unique abilities to snipe through cyberspace to disable Converter's control core and shutting it down. But again, as I've said, that ability is hyper-specific to one Navi and operator, which completely refutes Rika's previous argument about using every resource available. Other Navis, including Rockman, have tried this and not gotten that to work. It's not something that can be used or done by anyone and everyone, which the synchro chips, once their usage limitation is addressed, can eventually be made to be such a solution and would have been had the Dark Lords not stolen the first batch of the chips. And operators can be trained to raise their synchro rate with their Navis to be able to use them. But Rika's way? That requires an even greater hyper-specialization that very few Navis and operators are capable of, because that trained skill set is in part instinct and talent. Thus his attempt at Aesop, use your head, not brute force, is not really applicable here. Yes, he saved the day, but he saved the day using means that only work for him and his Navi. He at no point showcases that his method would work for everyone. And the parts of it that would be plausible for other people to do, we've already had it shown that other people have been doing that, and it hasn't worked. And moreover, Rika only shut down one of the generators, not all of them. Meaning the area that the dimensional area covers should just shrink and not shut down entirely as the other converters work together to cover a larger area than any single one of them would allow on their own. Finally, on top of that, Rika didn't actually defeat the realized Navi this way. Just shove them back onto the net where they can just freely retreat now that they've lost what they feel is their advantage. It resolves the crisis only in the short term, but makes him applicable to the same criticism he was lobbying at the use of cross-fusion in the first place. Has doing things that way helped much in countering and defeating the Dark Lords they're facing? And the answer to that is no. His way wasn't really any better. It's just patching over the problem and treating it as if it's the same as it is being resolved. Whereas Neto? He's deleted 2 Dark Lords this way already. Thus, Rika's chewing out of Neto as incompetent at the end here, it feels deeply wrong. Well, yes, his action saved Neto against an enemy neither knew how to face down properly. It was done so through hyper-specialized means of someone with deep training as a soldier, who never actually fought the enemy he said he was capable of fighting. Thus at no point wins this argument over what's needed to face down the Dark Lords. The wrap-up. We have no moral theater, for Rika's entire argument on why synchro chips aren't needed actually is not showcased as he's not shown actually succeeding at any fight with realized Navis or viruses. We have video killed the radio star, and yes, I know I used that joke already, but it is just that appropriate for VideoMan. We have Homage Hunter, for catching all of VideoMan's cinematic sight gags. Not much more to say on this one that I didn't already, especially since this is actually a 2-part episode, which we'll be getting followed up on next time. What I will say that I didn't before is if Rika at any point went into this with a respectful air, he wouldn't have just been stubborn about his views, but showed why they had merit, and offered in the end to assist Neto in thinking more actively, so he could use that in addition to his abilities with cross-fusion in the event it became unavailable, which is something that happens in the future. It would have kept the pair on better terms and built a better foundation, instead of having to start over again, as they'll be shown needing to do. Invisible ghost-type viruses begin to steal data from secure places all across the network, as Scilab brings in the dimensional converter Rika disabled intact. One wonders what happened to all the other converters Nebula and the Dark Lords have put out there to make this the first one they've recovered intact. What, do they have a recall function? Do they self-destruct or burn out after the field's disabled? There kinda needs to be an answer to that, as there's no reason any of the others couldn't service this. But yeah, with regards to the ghost case, well, we are once more reminded that Rockman, despite being a ghost in a machine, is himself scared of ghosts in this incarnation. But yeah, this 2-parter continues to enforce the Rika's a dick interpretation that's being pushed here as he refuses to work with Neto on this. This is, incidentally, another Kenichi Yamada episode. So of course, as a member of the Neto is an idiot camp of writers, he's gotta use Rika as an author proxy to spout all of that, after Masaharu Amiya gave him the opening to do so last week. Again, it can never be a both sides are right, both sides are wrong kind of deal with these kinds of things. Now can it? That would require nuance and respecting character portrayal instead of flanderization until the point their criticisms are addressed by throwing them to the side instead of proving them fundamentally wrong. And I do think the Neto is a dumbass interpretation thing is part of the problem, As I said about last time, nothing Rika himself did is anything Neto himself has not done. All he used that Neto couldn't are abilities programmed into exclusively Searchman, and did nothing to resolve the longer-term problems. But the series does not recognize that because half the staff are trying to make Neto fit the idiot hero stereotype where hearts and guts are all one needs, and that brains and instinct only get one so far without faith in others. Thus, the brainy ones always cause an argument until they get their asses handed to them because stupid people are suddenly superior. Or at least that's how it keeps getting written in so fucking many of these series that it's just fucking irritating. It actually makes me value all the more series that don't dignify that shit, like King of Braves Gao Gaigar, where the heroes of the series only superficially resemble meatheads, but when you look again at it all, most of their plans are ridiculously thought out and smart, and it's the courageous resolve of the main cast to take things that extra inch which secures them the key to victory. I get that Axess is trying to perform its plot by contrasting different people to all get them on the same page of becoming a united front against a force of evil that threatens them all, but the consistent problem I've had throughout going through this series again is the same one I had when I first was watching. The main protagonist isn't that stupid to deserve the condemnation he gets, and those doing so look like the even bigger assholes by comparison, even when they might have a point worth listening to, as their personal conduct ruins any argument they could make. And the refusal for the bystanders to intervene on Rika's conduct actually makes this worse, as it's proving his point for him that they don't trust that Neto's in the right on this. Anyways, the Dark Lloyd's benefactor was the one after the data their minions stole, offloading a large number of dark chips into their hands in gratitude, which in and of itself is telling. Anyways, the Saber Navis investigate the scene of the crime, Searchman's more advanced scouting tools managing to pick up traces of something having physically been there. But again, Rika's made to be a jerk and refuses to say what did it just to make Neto look bad, Neto asking Rush to help track the perpetrators in a different way. Why does a digital puppy love Italian food anyways? That's Garfield's thing. The ones actually responsible are Metors installed with invisible chips that are grabbing the data for the Dark Lloyds, which again, Searchman is uniquely programmed to fight against, unlike most other Navis. It once more shows the problem of this plot, that it's only because of Rika and Searchman's extreme hyper-specialization being useful in just these circumstances that makes them arrogantly believe they can deal with everything with no others being legitimate, and shunning the possibility of maybe, hey, if you think there's a problem with Neto, maybe get him to learn something from observing you in turn. He was brought here not only to learn, but to share his own skills with others after all. And he's been failing that assignment since he got here, and only ostracized himself from the entire command framework. Still, Rush finally pulls through and succeeds in bringing Neto and Rockman to an abandoned factory the Mentors are actually all being instructed to bring the stolen data to, allowing them to get there before Searchman can, since Rika's refused to provide the information himself for a proper assault on their hideout. Online, they find Desert Man and his use, and subsequent overuse of dark chips, is actually responsible for the cloaking effect the Mentors are being affected by, which, good luck explaining that to me, because you really can't. Unfortunately, Desert Man can also apply this invisibility effect to himself, which is a bit more of an issue. But fortunately, Neto and Rockman already know their weakness. Still, Desert Man chaining his specials eventually lets him get a hand on Rockman, threatening to throw him into a vat of what I presume to be magma data when Searchman is revealed to be on the premises. Rika doesn't care. He thinks Rockman's useless and deleting his Navi would get Neto thrown out of the Sabers. But Searchman is surprisingly the one that hesitates to follow that order. And it's not made clear as to why. Yeah, the Navis had one more encounter than their operators do, and Rockman has been more cordial a co-worker, but for a Navi designed to be emotionless like this does not connect on why he would suddenly choose to change from that. Better question, why is Neto not slotting an area steel chip to get Rockman out of Desert Man's grasp? We've seen area steels used in just these circumstances before. There's no reason not to use one now. Hell, they're not the only ones. Anti-damage, aka Kawarimi, which we know they have, as well, would permit the same. And it's not like I'm trashing Neto for not doing that, it's clearly the writer doing forced drama. But it would directly dispute Rika's claims to Neto being incompetent for him to get his own Navi out of a situation like this, when Rika would just write him off as a lost cause. Hell, it would invalidate Rika's entire argument, because Rika himself would not be using all the resources available to him. Hell, to make this worse, we've already seen Searchman be capable of shooting through targets to hit their actual enemy already. So this is not but forced drama to shove on Rika the belligerent Aesop that he can't do this on his own and his way won't work every time! One that if the character was not being written like a jackass, he wouldn't need. Or better yet, if he wasn't being a jackass and actually using his head as he claims is his specialty, he wouldn't realize that he could do both as Searchman does on his own, using a special freezing bullet he apparently has, to remove the threat of the death trap that allows Rockman the freedom to assist in counterattacking. For as I've been saying, this makes everything Rika said since he got here to be all around the issue of his own ego instead of the two disparate sides and skill sets coming together. But because Rika didn't use his head, Searchman doing this solo puts them at a disadvantage, which is only reversed by Rockman unlocking his next soul form.
Rockman. Shademan, 一緒に戦おう.
And with Rockman's scanning and targeting systems being improved, combined with the Navi's raw power, he succeeds in sniping the stratosphere. Rika, though, is not happy, leaving in a huff.
Rika-kun, 今日で研修は終わりだ.
But he didn't learn anything. Like, at all. The wrap-up. We once again have no moral theater, for Rika being written as a jackass for all the reasons I keep saying, hold even this entry back. Conversely, we have idiot plot, for Rika screwing over himself because he doesn't use his head to resolve a crisis, which is an attempt to discredit his argument over land being awful, but fails. We've got I've Got Soul, for Search Soul, bringing up the soul form total to 4 Red Sun souls unlocked, while Blue Moon souls are still at 2. And we have Treasure Sniper, for this plot having guns being the solution to a bunch of valuable data being stolen. Like I said last time, while Rika started this arc having a legitimate point and potential arc in encouraging Neto to learn and focus on more of his skills than he actively relies on, or have his initial view changed by his entire argument being discredited after seeing more of Neto in action, the character is made to double down on his viewpoint to the point of incredulity at the height of stupidity he descends to with his stubbornness, reflecting the staff discourse on how to portray Neto himself. As this is what always happens with characters that are trying to be made as idiot protagonists. They're proven right and succeed, not because of the merits of their own abilities, but because the plot said so. I absolutely loathe it when writers do that. Only made worse when, again, it's done because the writers are being so contrary to characterization to begin with. As I've said time and again, there's a difference between writing a character as a child and writing them as an idiot. Too many people, both in works of fiction and real life, think the two are synonymous. And relatedly, the only way to make some adult protagonists relatable to kids is to make those characters imbecilic man-children themselves. And it doesn't work. It has never worked. Lowering characters to that doesn't work, and neither does warping reality to accommodate actual true incompetence. Because I have seen how low this can go, that enforcing this to keep the two at odds is not in any way successful. Now, as I have said, Rika does get better. The next time he appears, he's in the hands of another writer that does handle the shift away from this jackassery better. And while I still say the pair are better here than in the games, because at least here they started out having a point before they became an authorial mouthpiece, the fact this wasn't being addressed still acts as a sore point for me. As a consequence of the previous episode, Desert Man is entering into the severe withdrawal stage of dark chip use, his powers going out of control, and him trying to raid a NetSaver facility that has taken possession of all the ones Neto was previously responsible for confiscating, mass loading them into himself to try and patch the damage the chips are actually doing to his data. Enzan being present in the facility to pull the manual override and sending in blues. Enzan deciding to capture him as those purple patches all over his body just cannot be healthy, and relatedly can tell them more about how long-term exposure to dark chips can affect all types of navies. Desertman is subsequently quarantined in Scilab, Shademan not happy that one of his minions got caught like this, and sending Flashman in to get Desertman out, or if he needs to, delete him before he can talk. Either or. Yuichiro goes over Desertman's data, finding it in an advanced state of decomposition, on the verge of complete collapse without continuing infusion of dark chip data. Enzan has seen this once before, when he was abroad, the Darkloids just being only slightly more resistant to it than a normal Navi is, and they have no idea it's happening to them, as the consequences of their addiction are better hidden from sight, because they were Navis that weren't created by human hands, but the natural convergence of data in cyberspace into Navi-like forms, using recovered data of deleted Navis. And to be fair, even in the anime timeline, that is something that is shown to happen. The biggest case being Pharaohman's data remnants being turned into the Gospel Bug Beast and Forte.exe respectively. But because their data wasn't crafted by humans, well, it explains a lot about their motivations, views, and why they wouldn't have the signs of corruption, as there's no visible way for them to check for it until the visual data they use for their bodies to be seen start to become corrupted in and of itself. This is where Flashman sends in viruses to attack, Rockman and Blues going on the defense. It being revealed that Desertman in the base net for Scilab being a decoy Enzan and Blues set up, just in case the Darkloids came for their captured comrade, which puts Shademan in a bit of a bind, as their benefactor seems oddly active in wanting to resolve this just as much as him, making Shademan suspect something else might be up with the man, who is increasingly less in shadow. Thus, the Darkloids are stuck with Plan C, carjacking. Yuriko and Needleman taking over Kifune and Rin's private vehicle and kidnapping them, so Scilab will have no choice but to release Desertman from their custody in exchange for their safety, as otherwise they'll be smashed in a car crusher. Yeah, that's actually a thing. Emergency window breakers are designed to work on tempered glass, not bulletproof glass that are made from clear polycarbonate materials on the inside and glass on the outside. Thus, a glass breaker actually cannot smash the plastic inner shell of bulletproof glass at all. Incidentally, this is a Kenichi Araki episode, showing what smart writing actually looks like once again. So yeah, they're forced to give in. Meijin giving Neto a ride to the location on his most famous of bikes, while Enzan is also redirected there. But despite giving up Desertman, well, the Darkloids go back on their end of the bargain when Flashman sees firsthand the shape Desertman is in. Almost his entire body, now the color of poison. Rockman ends up needing to fight Needleman to finally free the Elder Agents, utilizing Search Soul to pierce through the needles and get him to release the hostages at the last possible second. But as expected, they're not out of the woods yet, as a dimensional area goes up around them. Neto seeing if Rockman and Search Soul could use Searchman's warp sniping technique, only for it to be shown that the data stolen previously has now proof the dimensional converters against such attacks entirely. Once again, proving my point about how Rika's application of very specific tactics are not effective in the long term against an enemy that isn't stupid, and his underestimation of them would be more likely to get him and others killed instead of fighting them as they have been. Save someone in one scenario and damn them for all the others. Well, it's that, or it is Kenichi Araki chiding through story points the writers under him for writing a deliberate plot hole just to make Rika look better, and only ending up depicting him as an asshole as they did. But yeah, since it doesn't work, it allows Flashman in to knock them for a loop, and since Neto didn't immediately go for cross-fusion the second the field went up, his PT ends up knocked away from him, falling at Flashman's feet.
誰だ
Man, Enzan really is good at using those hunks of plastic as accurate projectiles. Oh, did I forget to mention that Enzan actually gets a transformation sequence in this series?
シンクロチップスロットインクロスフュージョンセーブアクアエレクバンブーソードエレメントソード
While Flashman manages to retreat, well, that isn't good news for him or the Darkloids. The damage the attack did, in tandem with the Dark Chip he used to fight Desert Man, has also pushed him past the corruption limit. Him returning to Shademan's palace, only for the ruler of the Darkloids to find his body is stained with the data corruption of the Dark Soul infection. Flashman's light, consumed by Shadow.
なんだ何が起きているのだ
It's simple, dude. You made a very, very bad deal. The wrap-up. We have Kidnapping Caper, for the type of plot this is. We have Bloody Quartet, for Enzan and Blues winning a battle with the use of 4 sword chips simultaneously. A category whose name is based on an actual attack technique called Bloody Quartet, which the pair use in the manga. This is a shorter review than we've had for a while on these, and for good reason. There is not a single problem with anything in this episode. No problematic character issue, nothing I have to highlight about why things can get wonky, Kenichi Rocky knew exactly what he was doing to course-correct the existing paradigms, and unlike half the staff does not feel the need to denigrate a character to pull off a competent plot, but logically get them to think through problems as the crisis emerges without them needing to flail around as if their head were cut off. As I keep saying, every show can and is improved if the cast part of them isn't treated as if they were brain dead. It's a pity that few writers ever learned that lesson. So, to continue on once more from last time, Shademan's pissed that the dark chips which have powered his forces are in fact destroying them from the inside out, and now he's got revenge on his mind against the Darkloid's benefactor. This all happening while more and more standard navies have become infected with the dark chips themselves, their ubiquity beginning to get out of hand. It being so bad that Rockman and Neto have had their hands full just quarantining navies overcome by the Dark Souls, having to defeat 3 that same day with a 4th case just reported, and it's not even noon yet. Even Blues and Enzan are being overwhelmed, as Neto's actually being sent to the dark chip rampages that the rival pair can actually respond to themselves. And this is a pair that have shown in the past the capability to defeat multiple navies at once that is being said about them, with Yurichiro back at the lab giving bad news to Neto and Enzan about these Dark Soul infected navies. They still don't know what special properties in the dark chips are so corruptive to their users, so they can't even begin to repair the damage they've done to the infected navies, meaning all of them they've captured will have to stay locked in quarantine, making it all the more essential that our heroes never even consider using them. And with them just exhausted, they end up being sent an anonymous message that tells them where the primary storage warehouse for dark chips may have been hidden, which should allow them to stem this tide. Rin being the one to check out the lead. Well, that's foul luck. Give me that one, it's where you can make that pun. Actually, the smuggled dark chips were hidden among the dolls as contraband. After all, if you see one thing in a shipment of items, then to the untrained or unobservant, you're not going to look underneath that to see what's actually there. A metaphor for media analysis, to be honest, though sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Yuriko reports their arrival to her boss, who chooses to immediately gaslight that this is the place they're looking for by sending down dimensional area converters to form a barrier over the building. Neto and Enzan are called in, with Nebula's boss contacting Shademan and asking for his help, as most of Nebula's dark ships are supposedly stored at that location. Yeah, Shademan sent them the anonymous tip. It makes sense. Enemy of my enemy and all that. He sends Gravity Man, previously seen in the network transmission GameCube game that released a few months before this, to deal with them this time. Yeah, as I remember discussing before, well, Battle Network 4 didn't actually release until a few months after this series started. Thus, while some navies in the games have appeared here as the show's writers got information on the game to work with, there's a reason most of the navies here have been from Battle Network 3 and other games. The only exception thus far having been Shademan, Burnerman, Aquaman, VideoMan, and Searchman. Now, as I've said on the subject before, being able to have an eclectic rogues gallery is an asset to the series at this point to better focus on an antagonist rotation, as it can give new challenges each episode. It's just always a matter of timing them. And speaking of timing, both Neto and Enzan have to find their own ways into the building. Neto finding a sufficient slope to use with his skates, while Enzan... Not like they have an easy time once they're inside either, as the place is swarming with high-level viruses. And of course, booby traps. This is where they encounter Gravity Man, who uses its power to cripple them with a supermassive graviton field that drops them to the ground and causes their shots to be deflected.
Gravity hold.
Yeah, dude attacks them with proto-black holes and physically crippling gravity, showing more to the merit of this guy as an enemy than Network Transmission actually did. Still, Gravity Man keeping them occupied allows Shademan to perform his true plan. In revenge against their benefactor, he's stealing all the dark chips himself. Dude, you already know that the dark chips are actually bad for you and the other Darkloids. Why do you want to steal them for yourself all of a sudden? It's not like you're suddenly going to be able to power through the data corruption by having more of them. That's entirely the problem. However, Neto and Enzan notice that Gravity Man can only focus on debilitation or attack or defense one at a time. Thus they get the idea to split their attacks, forcing it to attack and debilitate Neto, which leaves them completely open to Enzan counterattacking. However, it looks like Yuriko and her boss foresaw Shademan's betrayal. In the vault, him only finding one dark chip. Their stockpile of the devices is far, far away from here already. Shademan mad. Shademan very, very mad. And thus he decides to take out his anger on some humans that are left in his way. One hit KO, but the only reason they're not dead is the dimensional area collapsing, ending the entire incident. The wrap-up. We have a Xanatos Gambit for Nebula throwing one over Shademan's eyes. We have You Do Not Know the Power for Shademan legitimately being that much stronger than our heroes at the moment. There's a reason he doesn't normally get off his throne. Following from before once again shows the strength of the current main arc away from the inanity of the filler, and once more presents how the status quo is shifting away from the episodic for the time being, especially as it fully shifts the dynamic of the villains and their fracturing allegiances. It's a pity, though, that this is the end of said arc for some time. For next up, it's more Bubbleman. Bubbleman makes a horribly plotted presentation to the assembled Darkloid forces, saying they need to team up against Rockman to take him down for good, and the key is in how they need to beat his use of Soul Unison. Dude, he didn't even use Soul Unison against you. You're just that pathetic. And to be fair to this idiot, he's not wrong that Rockman's form change ability is his greatest advantage. But one of the issues with the Darkloids is their Dark Souls prevent them from being able to use anything remotely similar. That is, of course, with exception to Chaos Unison, which never ends up being used in the anime either, as far as I remember. And even that can be seen as a corruption of a Soul Unison, as it collapses its power into just one attack before it completely fails. And yeah, the Darkloids are not friends with each other. Thus Bubbleman suggesting they get close? Yeah, do not want. You're just gonna have to accept the reality and face the fact that no one is into you!
我らダークロイドが友情などというデータ化されないものになど頼れるか。
They do not believe in a thing called love.
僕、友達いないぷく。こうなったら、友達100人作ってやるでぷく。
Dude, you are not Gentaro Kisaragi. You need to have something likable about you first. You're not even classifiable as friend-shaped. But yeah, that's the plot of this episode. Bubbleman trying to make a friend. Any friend at all! And he has absolutely no idea what he's doing, scaring off basically everyone in the supporting cast. Yeah, you're going to regret that in about 2.5 years. Who does catch his attention, though, is Aquaman. Because Aquaman is just that young and a source of pure innocence that he doesn't realize the evil that is before them. Then again, Bubbleman is incompetent evil, which the naive often aren't aware to. But because Aquaman ends up going off to play with Bubbleman, well, his antics burn out Shuko, who can't seem to get him to respond, thus requiring Neto to get called in to see if he and Rockman can't find the wayward Navi. This being one of the rare episodes that remembers, oh hey, Toru is among Neto's friends group, thus causing Iceman to join in on the search. And what are the two doing? Oh god, that is disgusting! What is wrong with you? And worse, that's not even how you make carbonated beverages in the first place, nor what cider even is. But yeah, as you'd expect from Iceman being included out of the blue, he's the one that finds them, and with the 3 Aqua Element Navis with differing specialties, well, it causes more shenanigans between them, with Iceman placing an ice cube in their net drink, which actually gets it to sell now. I really hope Bubbleman is sharing the profits for this little enterprise. Side note, did the Dark Lords actually have a financial front to get things they need to that exist online, or did they just steal those too? Beat him up for the money, he'll cave on the first punch. Iceman tries to drag Aquaman back home now, but Bubbleman's entranced the young Navi too deeply by this point to realize that this is an extreme case of stranger danger. I miss when the kids were that self-aware to snark. It really only happens with certain writers when it was supposed to be baked-in elements of the characters. Bubbleman sequesters the other Navis off in a private beach net, and tries to force them to figure out how to use them to pull off a soul unison, which fails. After all, Rockman's ability with them is part of an ultimate program that permits his adaptation to certain stimuli. With the soul unison ability set, it's augmenting him with a power based on other Navis that have abilities he does not. Bubbleman here has made friends with 2 other Aqua Elemental Navis whose core ability sets, well, he could just do himself if he wasn't so stupid, simply by acquiring Aqua Element chip data. It's at this point Rockman and the others find them suspecting something's up with Bubbles over here, which he confirms by trying to get Aquaman and Iceman to attack Rockman for no reason. It is rather unwise to attempt to throw down with a rock while in an ice castle. He succeeds by saying that they're really trying to break their ice castle, and really, while I get Aquaman getting conned by this, Iceman? Really? Really? All I'm saying is, you're getting your wingman privileges revoked. The assault requires the operators to actually go to the physical location, and the second Rockman can load his soul forms, the tide, against this team-up changes. But as Bubbleman doesn't know that Soul Unison requires a special Navi system, well, his attempts to get a non-dark jet power-up fail spectacularly, especially when Shuko and Toru show up to call back their misbehaving Navis. Thus, all he's left with now is a melting empty ice castle, and not even a song to cheer him up with. And I'd feel sorry for him if it weren't for the fact that I just plain despise the guy. The wrap-up. We have Melodrama Queen, to the expected over-the-top depressive antics of Shuko. To be fair, she is doing better, but she really should consider taking that act to the theaters. She'd probably be a hit for stage plays. We have defeat equals friendship? Question mark? For Bubbleman failing to gain victories through the power of camaraderie. The Aqua-Navi trio unfortunately would be a recurring thing going forward, simply as a thing to keep the guy around with. And while it is ultimately harmless, it's still obnoxious. Overall, with this one, as much as I make clear I despise Bubbleman for being a nuisance, this is otherwise a decent filler episode with the Aqua-themed Navis just getting involved in some harmless shenanigans with no real crisis weighing everything down. Sometimes you need that kind of story between larger events to allow an audience to decompress. It's again something lost in recent series that always have to beat story arc down people's throats, that sometimes the story works better just with chances for it to breathe. And maybe, sometimes get an audience on board a character that they hate. It doesn't quite work here, but it is a legit, honest attempt, and I can at the very least respect it for that. Seriously, how can you not tell that this man is evil incarnate? Blues and Rockman pair up to defeat ongoing waves of viruses coming to assault Scilab. All of them focus on getting to the captured dimensional converter to destroy it before Scilab can get something incriminating out of it, which does nothing but frustrate their operators, as they've been at this for several days in a row with no luck. Something Neto can't help but grumble about in class. All pretense about hiding his NetSaver job at this point being pretty much dropped.
科学省が保管してるなら当然ファイアウォールでガードされてるはずだよ。言われてみりゃそうだな。全然気づかなかった。気づきなさいよそれぐらい。
By the way, Mayuri Sekijima episode, meaning Neto's back to being presented as brain dead. This is one of the worst examples of this too, as it's showing the rest of the cast as stupid as well, as the entire point of the viruses they fight is they're either too strong to be stopped by Scilab's firewall, or the sheer number of them is just too much for the firewall to handle, both of which has already been established in previous content, alongside the point we've made previously that, well, the data viruses get in literally everything from experimental tech on down that would have already been detected. Directed attacks, as the Dark Lords and Nebula are doing, are not going to be deterred. So bashing Neto about not thinking about this isn't applicable here in the first place, because the firewall doesn't matter! Anyways, Neto's called in to work with Enzan on another assignment, them acting as the bodyguards for a scientist that's been called in to consult an analysis of the converter, Dr. Regal from Kingland, who is totally not evil. Nope, no siree Bob. But it turns out that, well, everyone's been lying to Neto because suddenly he's being characterized as a blabbermouth? This being rooted from the fact that he was completely incapable of keeping himself secret as a NetSaver? When he never outed his identity himself? I will remind you all, keeping his status as a NetSaver secret from his friends was his idea! In order to keep them safe so they wouldn't rush in to help in a crisis where they could end up getting hurt. Not something he was instructed to do initially. Yes, it was a bad decision on his part, but it was from a point of deep responsibility. What we've seen throughout this arc and season is him being responsible with regards to all his NetSaver duties, including keeping his mouth shut even when he didn't have to. I seriously do not understand this. Why is it that half the writing staff have such an insipid and awful interpretation of Neto as a character? As I've said, Mayuri Sekijima is the worst about this, to the point he drags down every single member of the cast in his attempt to assert it. And whenever it pops up, it is always in stark contradiction to everything else we've seen. And it drags the show down so much. And it's not like their decoy plan helped them at all, considering they called in the grand mastermind of the scheme, meaning his friendly secret agent is going to track them anyways. Yeah, I get a virus every time I eat something that sticky too. Neto then proceeds to out of nowhere treat deleting them as a game, something he knows better than to do, while everyone else treats this as something serious. Anyways, Regal's brought to the converter, Yuichiro going over what they've been able to find out. Except Searchman did. That's how he disabled it. that allowed it to be shut down and salvaged while the internal system was left intact for analysis of its data instead of the entire thing burning out. Did Sekijima actually bother to learn what any of the other writers actually did, or did they just get cliff notes? Yurichiro thinks this energy core might somehow, inexplicably, lead them to the Darkloids, when that's not how that works at all. They need transmission data and security data, not information on its power core. Regal asks they log into the converter themselves to see if there's anything there they can use. Rockman installing Numbersoul to see if they can't analyze anything there for something hidden within. And Regal's cybernetic eye, allowing him to see and transmit the Scilab's firewall data that's hiding this secret lab from Yuriko, so she can just pass it along to the Darkloids. In specific, Sparkman, who has been promised the power of dark chips in cooperation. Except they already know dark chips are bad for them, and I wouldn't think Shademan would willingly infect more of his subordinates with them if he could help it. They've not exactly been getting a huge supply of them after all, for all of them to be hooked on them by this point, as otherwise they'd all be in advanced stages of degeneration already. Inside the system, Rockman's analysis finds something that interests Regal. Finding inside the leftover distortion of the converter's energy core that the episode now says that Searchman did destroy. God, was there no proofing of this fucking script? Well, there are the remnants of dead navies. And here's where we tie back to the beginning of the season with the assault on Net City. As this purported energy core control system is all powered by the computation abilities of abducted navies. From this, Regal figures out how to fix the converter, bringing it back online. Which would be nice if they can repurpose the tech so they can use dimensional areas whenever they want. Just wait until next season for that. But as they test reactivating it, well, Sparkman gets in the system, ready to use the converter to realize himself. And the navies trying to stop him have their own power drain to process the data the system needs to project its hard light holograms. As part of why Nebula's converters keep burning out, is the calculation process literally devours the navies trapped within them. How long it takes them to shut down, now tied to how quickly it uses up the navies it does. Which seems rather backwards. I mean, you could just use a standardized program to make all the calculations you need without having to co-op a lesser AI's program to do the same. Write a dedicated script and let it run on its own. It kind of seems like a needlessly cruel shortcut or stopgap, but at least one that makes sense for a villain to do with regards to Regal pulling an evil Rick. And when Yurichiro later finalizes his own version of the technology, he makes it so it doesn't have to run on torturing an endless amount of Mortys. And yeah, Blues and Rockman end up pretty badly drained by the point Sparkman gets realized, weakening Neto and Enzan's ability to fight when cross-fused, and leaving them at a heavy disadvantage. For with their physical capabilities not augmented as they should be, the two can't keep up with a fully realized Navi. Made worse when Sparkman uses one of his game abilities to make literal shadow clones of them that aren't as debilitated as them. While they manage to double-team them, it's once again the glory of Area Steel combined with the self-damage boosting powers of Blues and Enzan trusted Muramasa sword that finally turns the tide. It's odd that as much as I rag on Sekijima for being the cause of horrible character depiction in this show, that they're one of the few that actually tries to adapt actual game mechanics into their writing of battles for the series. Just in this fight, how they show the game mechanic manipulation of Custom Sword, and mentioning their HP dropping dangerously low which insanely boosts Muramasa, it makes sense and is a good application of them. Made better by how Muramasa becomes Chawd and Protoman's signature weapon in the NT Warrior manga, where it even allows them to style change. But the need to hold the supercharged Muramasa back makes Sparkman put everything into that. So when Neto tries a sneak attack, it's only the Darkloid's benefactor warning him that tips him off to the danger, and in turn use Enzan as a hostage. This ploy works, Neto unable to shoot, allowing Sparkman to counterattack and disable them both, leaving him free to destroy the dimensional area converter's power core. We've discussed this before. Whatever the converters are realizing can't actually touch them due to them projecting the dimensional area outwards from themselves. And we've already seen the things are insanely sturdy, so they're not going to be taken offline from one hit. Kenichi Araki, the show's head writer, clarified this a couple episodes ago already, that it shouldn't work. Now, if he had attacked the equipment around it, which is made of real matter, and set off a chain reaction in the lab that caused the thing to be burned out, that is different. Or hell, crushing it under stuff that is made to fall from the ceiling. That works too. But the way the episode actually handles it is once more a contradiction to what we've seen before. And one that is wholly unnecessary, and reasserts what I've said about Sekijima really not being paid to give a damn to what the other staff writers are doing and have done with the construction of his own additions to the series. So yeah, this entire operation was a wash. The only thing learned is what I've said earlier. Net navies are literally drained to death to make these things work, for no other reason than to be cruel. And that's knowledge that doesn't really help them at all in the grand scheme, merely explaining why so many net navies the world over have been going missing. And it's all ultimately to plan by the bad guys, as the heroes of it haven't gained anything with this knowledge. And while Enzan suspects that Regal might have had a hand in things as he heard his voice call out to Sparkman, it's not like that's actual proof considering the other Nebula agent pulling doppelganger duty as it is, meaning his voice could have just been copied. The wrap-up. We have Totally Not Evil for the introduction of Dr. Evil, Regal. We have I'll Do It Myself for Dr. Regal being hands-on with regards to getting Scilab's hands off his dimensional area converters. We have writer neuroses for Sekijima and their problem with character depiction. Once more, in spite of my loathing of Sekijima's brand of flanderization, this is not necessarily a bad episode. There are some good Neto moments here with how, despite others' words, he does take his job seriously and understand its importance. And in wavering in attacks to not harm Enzan, who he does respect and considers a friend by this point, are good for his depiction. As is the plot about the Nebula forces working to destroy the generator show they're an actual threat and actively competent bad guys. But when put in context to everything that's happened in the series and the rules it's supposed to be operating under, that's where it gets trickier. I get why this might not have been caught back in the day. After all, marathoning episodes of TV shows like is often done now wouldn't exactly have been doable back then to be able to have every detail immediately on hand. At least until all the DVDs would have been released. So someone watching the series week to week wouldn't have caught the inconsistencies that hamper this story and this writer so much. But from a broader perspective, well, it's like I said, the Rockman anime is held back by these issues all along it. And it's really only when Sekijima's camp and the writing room are taken out of focus or mediated do the fuller merits of the series and its stronger long game arc with the villains really shine. With what's been built up from the previous episodes, it can't fully destroy that momentum, only highlight how huge that character inconsistency problem can be when they keep relying on it when they shouldn't. So it turns out Bubbleman has been stockpiling his own supply of dark chips. How? He's never been on an operation where he'd be given even one. He's not actually using them either, just storing them away, which makes them open season for other Darkloids that have become addicted to them, to my glee and his horror. Though my glee ends quickly, as Bubbleman's lack of dark chip use actually makes him an asset to Shademan, who's now looking to get his minions off the damn things before it kills them all. In the meantime, Neto and Mail have once more joined the Hot Springs Club in one of their outings. This one an exclusive resort up in the mountains where it's geothermically active. But with the widening divide between them, Dr. Regal, hey, he may still be in shadow, but the character actually has been introduced properly at this point, so there's no point in not saying it's him now. Anyways, Dr. Regal attempts to start making deals with the addicted Darkloids directly to get the dark chips. Burnerman speaking for the assembled that, yeah, they're at the point in believing that it doesn't matter what Shademan wants for them, they just want power. The power the dark chips give them no matter what. And thus, Bubbleman's part in this. Since he hasn't used one, he's not addicted, thus can act as a double agent against Regal to keep Shademan informed of what the others are doing, so he may eventually subvert Regal entirely after he knows who he is and where he is. But yeah, Burnerman's the first up for the next round, and that ties into where Neto and company are. Burnerman choosing a geothermal power plant for his own attack that if it's disrupted, could cause the magma chamber they're tapping to erupt. Thing is though, that the security Burnerman forces his way through is a layered one, meaning him brute forcing his way through the first layer tips off the real-world operators to the danger. Or you could, have the power systems for the place not be put in as part of the network and actively isolated from it. I've talked about this before. Real-world power generation facilities do not in any way allow for networked or wireless access to anything outside of them as part of their security against hacking and intrusion. Keeping them off the grid prevents such crises up front. It's only a matter of time before Bubbleman gets through, but the facility is so up in the mountains, it'll take most of them forever to get up there. So fortunate then that Neto's already in the area to provide more immediate relief. If it weren't for Enzan saying he can deal with it himself and commandeering a helicopter to get up there. As for Neto and company... How is Adolf Hitler alive in the year 20XX? But yeah, the Darkloid screwing with the local network, that affects all sorts of geothermal stuff, including natural geothermal hot springs like where they're headed. Neto and Mail both scalded as the ambient heat skyrockets when they tried charging through the hot springs club's usual nonsense to finally get in the baths. I admit I'm usually not on board these kinds of running gags, but it's a case where it works for me simply because subverting the bid actually causes consequences for those trying to get around it, thus reinforcing such in a non-caustic way. Similarly screwy antics happen throughout the rest of their trip, leading them to eventually realize something's up with the entire system, causing Neto to ultimately link up with Enzan and Blues on their own. The irony is, the mess with the geysers and other nonsense around town, that was Bubbleman trying to create a distraction. Had he not done that, Bubbleman would have only had Blues to deal with, and Neto and Rockman would have remained oblivious to what was happening. Whether that was deliberate or not, considering how he was supposed to be a double agent, is questionable, but he's completely incapable of stopping them.
なんてあっけないダークロイドだ。
バブルマンとやら、いつもああなのか。
まあね。
But he did his job in distracting them long enough so the power plant takes significant damage from Bubbleman breaking in, but it leaves a pretty clear trail straight to him. But not before he succeeds in disabling the heat regulation system, meaning all it takes is disrupting the underground magma pocket below them to cause an eruption, and that can be done via the dimensional area Regal set up in advance, which will allow Bubbleman straight down to it. At least assuming the dimensional area covers that large a distance underground. Projection tech like this should only penetrate so far after all.
マグマをもっともっと熱くしてやる。火山が爆発すれば人間世界に戦慄と恐怖だぜ。
I mean, volcanoes are in my top 10 for deaths I most fear. Considering by living in Wisconsin, I'm in the death via suffocation by ash cloud range of the North American supervolcano, should that choose to erupt in my lifetime. Also a reason why I've never once considered visiting Yellowstone or any geothermically active part of the world. But to the entire human world, I'd call belief in that stupid if this were a human, but, well, self-created AI program. They're not exactly aware of how the human world works. This thing erupts, it'll be a tragedy for sure. People directly impacted will be in a bad shape for a while, but you're not going to shred human society with it. You're just a distraction keeping attention away from Regal's actual plans, dude. Anyways, due to the power of the dark chip, Bubbleman envelops himself in a heat haze that prevents him from being destroyed on impact with the magma. Meaning, well, they've gotta do something drastic.
何をしている。
バトルチップを変更だ。結構不便だよな、これ。
早くしろ。
Oh, wait about 9 episodes. But yeah, there's another chip that does the same thing Bubbleman just did, which allows Neto to dive in straight after him. Now, how they even see each other to fight is a good question, since Magma is basically just really hot rock. But they drag him out before forcing his retreat, the kids managing to get away from the worst of the heat before the dimensional area falls. Enzan joining Neto for a soak in the aftermath. Neto unaware that the hot springs still hadn't cooled down to tolerable temperatures just yet. But elsewhere, in a base forgotten by all, Shademan's obtained the blueprints to construct his own dimensional converters, which will potentially free his faction from the need for Regal. The wrap-up. We have Burn Baby Burn for all the heat-induced damage this episode. We have Disco Inferno for Bubbleman's multiple uses of widespread fire destruction. We have Burn Baby Burn for Bubbleman's plan to literally burn a village to the ground. And we have Burn That Mother Down for Neto literally turning himself into a draconic fireball to stop Burnerman. Surprisingly, I actually misremembered this episode pretty badly from childhood. I actually believe this was the last appearance of Burnerman in the show, and he was deleted here. That actually was not the case, but it would have been cool if it had been. No, the reason I never saw the episode where Burnerman would be deleted later is that episode was the only one of Axess's broadcasts to be Canada exclusive. We've not actually gotten to any episodes that have been skipped for Axess yet. Thus far, the entire first half of the season was broadcast with no major screw-ups to it from Kids WB side of things, beyond airing the first episode of it as a special premiere almost half a year early. That ends up happening more after this point though, and Burnerman as an antagonist of the week doesn't have much more life left to him, as you can probably tell from how his sanity is starting to slip. But yeah, as you can tell from the usual fare brought to us by Katsuhiko Chiba, while this episode may meander a bit with Neto's side and things, it works to ground the mundane once more with the cyberspace threats that can throw normal life for a loop in this setting. And it's honestly better for it. Neto once more at his best in being a responsible, smart battler, and it's the shenanigans he's dragged into that end up with him exasperated and unintentionally the punchline, as opposed to deliberately being made to be one. Even the camaraderie with Enzan and them both not getting caught up in their own egos was good. While I didn't comment on it, Enzan wanting to take up the duty for settling this attack alone was very well handled. It didn't come off as an arrogant claim of, I don't need Neto to settle this, but as if he was saying, he has a day off, no need to call him in when I'm covering his shift anyways. Like you would hear from any reasonable coworker. Then when Neto does show up, he just rolls with it instead of telling him to go back. Well, this easily could have been an Enzan and Blue's solo outing story, with them taking point for the first time this season. It honestly works due to them doing the supportive buddy thing, especially since we're near the dead center of the season as it is, and Shademan's own plans in the background are going to throw the status quo for a loop soon enough. You might notice something a little different about this episode right off the bat. And that is the video quality for the version I'm using that has subs is much, much better. Yeah, as I've said before, the rips of the series are very old mid-2000s copies, the only workable ones with subtitles available being the original broadcast rips Wolfpack Productions made. Thing is, as I also got into before when discussing Wolfpack and the people who ran it, is over time they kind of got backlogged and had less time to sub stuff. So their pace of release eventually tailed so far behind the release of the series that they were able to get the DVD releases of the show to use as their video sources. These days you can find the entirety of it unsubbed online, with no one just taking the time to clean up the very early messy subs, or transcribe Wolfpack's work on Axess or early stream into the cleaner high-quality versions, as, hell, Wolfpack's work by this point had very few overt errors or unnecessary localization changes. So why break something that didn't need fixing? The irony on that, of course, being that this changeover happens at the same time that we get round 2 with VideoMan, who is given multiple dark shifts by which to enact his own scheme. The hostile takeover of the film and television industry. You're either a couple years too early or too late, depending on which industry strike you were looking to join in on. So let's see. This time the film parody is Star Wars, the early Harry Potter films, and The Matrix, again, mashed up into... The film industry was never the same after they started writing movies via ad-libs. Curse you, 2008 writers' strike! Yeah, this is all happening at a rental store. The various physical copies of media all going completely nuts from virus infestation. And as Rockman fights... he has no idea that he is on candid camera. VideoMan shooting him guerrilla style. A few days pass, though, the Igari brothers still thinking to rent a movie from the place they helped, only to find that the movie they're after is out of stock. Or you can just buy a copy to own yourself and save you the rental fee. Or better yet, secondhand stores. I'm pretty sure you're near a Mandarake retail location. However, a new virus is starting to affect things. It appearing as a red-eyed Rockman. Oh, come on, Dark Rock's not supposed to show up for another year yet. Yeah, VideoMan's actually inserted data clones created from recordings of his into copies of every popular movie that was getting released on home video. So there are literally thousands of these clones now, all of which have been boosted by VideoMan's dark chips into being a complete mess. The fortunate thing is the clones can only copy movements VideoMan recorded into them. Thus they're not self-sentient, and a competent Navi and operator can avoid being damaged by them. But the problem is Rockman's power level is above most Navis as it is. VideoMan's own skills augmenting them, and just the sheer volume of the clones out there is a problem. Fortunately, Enzan and Blues are more than capable of fighting these clones. They do know how to fight Rockman better than anyone else after all. So them being around is a major asset. Man, just think what would have happened had this episode been made later in the run. But even without these things being realized, they're causing a big mess for the net police with just the sheer volume of incidents they're part of. And VideoMan's still busy printing more, simply because he hates having a film half done.
どうやってコピーロックマンを？よーし、テレビの前の君に特別に教えてあげよう。
It is always strange when you can't tell whether a character is breaking the fourth wall or just sticking to their thematic idiom, considering he was written to act just like this previously. But yeah, he recorded it all on his film and transferred that data through the jacks in his head into VHS copying machines. Every false Rockman burned into each of them. Now, if this was DVDs, I could believe that. Just map over the digital file data with something virulent, and I could see that happening, but VHS tapes? Like, I know what they were doing with this. This is very clearly a reference to The Ring franchise, with a murderous ghost possessing a tape and killing those that view it, but technology's a bit different when it comes to plug-and-play physical media. Hell, this actually runs against the fact that VHS tapes, both in Japan at the time of this episode's make, and also in the previous episodes featuring VideoMan, were said to both be anachronistic technology that wasn't being produced anymore, or at least not popularly. Hell, by 2004, outside of very stubborn film outlets, studios had stopped making VHS tapes and by and large had fully transitioned to releasing everything on DVD. With the last movie put on VHS, David Cronenberg's A History of Violence, ending the format entirely in 2006, just at the time people started battling between Blu-rays and HD DVDs as the superior successor format. But that's in America. In Japan, VHS as a format died in the year 2000, and there was much faster adoption of it thanks in part to PlayStation 2's having a drive that read DVDs, and that console being so ubiquitous that it disguised how fast adoption of the DVD format actually was. So yeah, this plan shouldn't work the way VideoMan says it is, and yet the way it is being presented is actually done in a very engaging manner. It makes sense to take advantage of hyper-popular movies to spread these bootleg copies of one of the most powerful Navis on the planet to wreak havoc every time the movie itself is played in any system. And because the means of delivery is so subtle, there's no easy way to connect the source of the problem with its consequence. And with the massive volume of attacks, there's just too much data to process in reporting them that this commonality is just that easily overlooked by anyone investigating it. And if it weren't for the fact that Neto was trying to get a copy of the movie himself, it likely would have remained a mystery for much longer. But Enzan finding that the one Neto rented was destroyed by waves released from devices hacked by the hacked Rockman clones, gets the pair to realize the tapes are the source of it all, showing that in his fervor to cause havoc, that VideoMan ended up overplaying his hand. As the thing about physical copies of media is the more you make copies of the same thing over and over again, the worse it gets as the quality of the master copy degrades, and in turn the copies of the master copy degrade as well. So the more derivative copies you make that aren't from the master get worse and worse. It is actually why it is very important for TV and film production companies to keep the master film versions of all the content they produce, which not every studio does, as you get the best version of something if it's sourced from that. Just in the case of this episode and the format change for producing a sub of it, this episode went from master tape to DVD copy to digital rip to version with a stub installed on it. For the prior file version, it was master to TV studio copy to broadcast, to version received as a broadcast, to rip of that broadcast stored in the file, to one that had the sub embedded into it. The more versions it has to go through, via all those forms of transmission and conversion, well, there's a reason there's such a quality difference. Regardless, Meijin has an idea of where VideoMan sequestered himself, since any type of physical media can be tracked back to the printers of those copies, with them cornering VideoMan right at their production facility. He sets up a dimensional area field, sticking viruses on them so VideoMan is once more free to get recordings of cross-fused Neto in action to use against the pair. However, we've already seen the way to defeat these things. Energy waves released mess up the copies VideoMan's made. Specifically, the true enemy to any older means of recording and data storage. And that is magnets. And with that, all of VideoMan's tape-based abilities are rendered useless. What can we say, dude? You should have switched to digital.
Double Magma Cannon!
こんなエンディング認めないぞ
With this, all of VideoMan's tampered videos are taken out of circulation. The episode says something different, but it's kind of dumb as that's not how physical media works. And the event ends with Neto finally getting a chance to see that friggin' movie all this ended up revolving around, with Enzan giving his friend a break, and a chance to see it with the film's actual stars, who are here to promote the theatrical run of the next part in the series. And much like this episode ended up being overall, the sequel was much better than the original. The wrap-up. We have anachronistic tech modern day, for the VHS tape still being ubiquitous. Seriously, the last VHS I ever got was in the year 2000, people. They were going out of fashion long before they actually died as a format. Incidentally, the last VHS tape I ever bought, Pokemon the movie Spell of the Unknown. Not even kidding, even with the 4Kids Entertainment standard nonsense factored in, that is a damn good film. We have Grand Theft Me, for Rockman's IP rights being stolen. We have Reference Fest, for the very then-current films this episode homaged. This episode, almost in the perfect center of the season, is just plain fun. It's a scenario that hadn't been tried before with any of the antagonists, and the fact it actually works is great for seeing a mass Navi attack that's not one of the usual suspects, until it actually becomes one of the usual suspects the following year with all the later Navi clones. Not like I can fault this episode for that though, considering these were faulty clones to begin with. And it continues the longer arc between Neto and Enzan with regards to the two not just respecting one another as rivals or being respectful co-workers during NetSaver duties, but actually being friends. It's a long-run arc for the series now, with this being the 80th episode overall of the anime. But they fully transitioned to that being true between them. Bad staff writers flanderizing their characters notwithstanding. And it is something that will play in next time, as when we return, at the dead center of the season, does the largest shift in the status quo begin, all revolving around a girl mourning her dead Navi. Regal shows off a new type of dark chip, one hidden within normal-seeming battle chips so the user won't know they're infecting their Navi until too late. Oh hey, the anime finally caught up with the game's release where that's how gameplay-wise those were used, especially in Battle Network 5. With this chip being handed over to a new patsy of theirs. After all, Yuriko can't do all the heavy lifting. This is at the same time the NetSavers keep finding supposed dark chip warehouses abandoned. Though this time, finding someone having been taken prisoner there? This is so totally a trap. And yeah, this is where we had the anime debut of Aneta, who in the games was something of a sociopath, but here, well, we'll get into that. It's not surprising in retrospect they'd want to keep her around though. While in English this was one of the few of Morike Hendrix's notable roles, which unfortunately also includes Tabby from Dot Hack Roots, but they also played Luna Maria Hawk from Gundam Seed Destiny and Revi from Black Lagoon. Well, for her Japanese actress, Rie Kugimiya, This was the early side of what's been shown to be a long and successful career, voicing Nana Trinity for yet another Gundam 00 cast member to be part of this series, but also Louise in The Familiar of Zero, Alphonse Elric in Fullmetal Alchemist, Mary Goodwin in Xenosaga, Agnese in the Raildex franchise, and Risei Kuchikawa from Persona, just to name a few. She's inserted into their group as an eyewitness to the dark ship smuggling that was abducted to silence her over what she saw. Though as usual, Enzan thinks something sus about this, as he swears he recognizes her. And thanks to Plot Exposition Playhouse via a news broadcast, we get an idea as to why, as Anetta's only recently recovered from hospitalization, having been part of an incident at another hospital where a system malfunction set the place on fire, and it was only due to the intervention of a net saver that the patients even lived. The exposition drop says this happened half a year ago, but due to the sliding timescale the series eventually ends up operating under, it's iffy considering Enzan's only been deputized as long as Neto has, and the season has not been showing 6 months have passed since its start. Sure, it has, in real time, but if you don't accept the reality that incidents like this occur more frequently than once a week, you get the mess of the Pokemon anime where Ash should be like 17 or 18 by this point if you count each Pokemon region as taking him a year to clear. And even internally in the Battle Network timeline, both the games and the entire anime take place inside of 3 years. But yeah, what happened during that incident is she was injured in a hit-and-run traffic accident, and was helped through her physical therapy by a medical navvy named Silk, who she grew immensely attached to, as Silk was the only one to encourage her that she could recover. But during the fire, she witnessed Blues deleting her. Seeing that further traumatized her, as Silk was basically the only one she'd felt was her friend. Thus, why Anetta's helping Nebula is they're using those feelings and twisting them to their own purposes in letting her act out her revenge on the one she believes was responsible, Enzan. Even as she herself doesn't know the full story behind why that all happened. But knowing what she does, it's understandable for her to be angry, and look for an outlet for that anger in confronting those she feels is responsible, right in that determination or no. However, it's important to note the nuance of how that is executed, thanks in part to Masashi Kubota being the writer for this one, as nuance, as I've been bashing into your heads, is not something half the writers on the show do well. But throughout all of this, they've written and presented Anetta as being conflicted about the choice she is making, as the Dark Light incidents and the dark ships triggering them are becoming more public. So, does she want to endanger more people, just for her own petty revenge? And by proxy, this also addresses something else in the storyline as well, Enzan's own ruthlessness. We've seen before from him that he has no hesitation in having Blues attack to kill, being willing to choose deleting Navis as a first choice with regards to dealing with problems. Now to be fair, we have also seen him be able to judge when that would be necessary, so it's not his default to everything, as we saw with Raika and Searchman. But he is more willing to jump to that step as the fastest means of resolving a conflict. Anetta's story here thus acts as consequences for him in relation to that. She is someone victimized by that attitude who is now being used by the actual villains of the series as a weapon against him. And he really has no one to blame but himself for it, and the fallout that results from this is an entire plot line that ends up needing to be resolved. This, again, is all why I feel the character is much better used in the anime than her game counterpart is, where in the games she's just an unthinking gullible eco-terrorist, as why she is doing what she is far more fleshed out, grounded, and relatable, and on top of that, explored in the anime. I love Battle Network 3, but it is impossible to say they didn't use Anetta better in the anime. Regardless, Anetta observes as Yuichiro does an analysis of Neto and Enzan's physical condition. Since cross-fusion is still a new technology, they don't know the consequences of its use on the human body long-term yet, and with Regal here, well, why not? But while they're busy, Anetta slips the Dark Sword chip into Enzan's battle chip pack, before being given orders to take the boys out to a place where the Dark Lloyds will be waiting.
俺なら構わないが。
And the shipping begins! Oh my, does the shipping begin! Said place is the Akihara Shopping Tower, a high-profile, all-in-one high-rise shopping complex built out of a standard office building. Yeah, a reason why most malls are usually 2 or 3 stories tall. Any taller than that, and they end up having difficulty actually moving merchandise into the building, as there ends up being a shortage of loading docks supply trucks can reach, to say nothing about occupancy or parking limitations. Neto, because he's curious about Enzan's, well, change of heart on this whole affair, follows them on what can't be described as anything else but a date. This, as I said, helps create the air that Aneta is conflicted about everything, as the guy she hates for what he did, he's actually a nice person deep down, and it's seeing him be nice to a wheelchair-bound girl that gets her to spill about her being in that incident earlier, which Enzan had already figured out. Before we can get more into that, however, the fire alarms all go off, sealing them in and causing oxygen to be vented from the building as a fire suppression measure. Fire extinguisher foam makes more sense to use still. Any damaged products in a mall like this would be covered by insurance. But this brings back up Aneta's trauma. As minus the lack of an actual fire, these are the exact same circumstances Silk died in, trying to unseal the building to save those trapped inside it. Enzan sends Blues in, only for them to be confronted by Needleman. Man, Needleman must not have much time left if Yuriko's going that overboard with the dark chips for this. I actually do not remember Needleman ever suffering from dark chip corruption. What the hell? It's all to force Enzan to start burning his battle chips in order to trick him into using the tainted sword chip, as otherwise that many dark chips is too much for even Blues to handle. But it's Enzan's own resolve to save them from this that truly does get to Aneta, revealing the circumstances around Silk's deletion aren't what she thought, and that he'd already found the dark chip in his pouch that she'd slipped in. The truth of what happened to Silk wasn't that Blues killed her callously, it's that Silk had sacrificed herself. The only way she had to hack the system at the time to get Aneta and the others out was to fuse herself with the system and use her own frame to suck the dark aura that had disrupted it out of it. Blues deleting her, allowing it to be purged from the system. Sometimes there's no way to save someone other than through sacrifice, and Blues and Enzan were merely the means she chose by which to commit suicide. Also, Aneta would live. But while that might seem like a cop-out, if you've been paying attention to my analysis of Enzan's character throughout these reviews, it does inform something else. Bar when the bad writers have had their turn of the wheel, Enzan has been coming off as a kinder individual for a while now, and with this being from an incident months ago, it acts as a retroactive reasoning as to why. Enzan knew who Aneta was this entire time, and has been acting unusually kind to her throughout all of this. It's clear the incident had stuck in his mind as what happened wasn't him being callous, but caused him to reconsider how he acted. That is still something that comes from a consequence, a reflection on your own actions. And even then, this isn't something Aneta herself refused, that there were other options from that. But inevitably, that's the anger Aneta stuck with. That someone died because of her, and she just has no way to know how to respond to that. And that's the key thing here. It's easy to lash out and blame someone else. But when you're partly at fault for why you lose someone important to you, there's no simple way to come to terms with that. And once more, that makes someone open to manipulations, as Nebula did, to give them someone to direct that anger at, regardless of whether they deserve it or not. Even so, it's once more important to recognize Aneta's hesitation throughout all of this. She knew it was wrong, and it was eating at her just as much to go through with it. Thus, in a way, she's thankful they stopped her, as now she can come clean about the truth of this true Dark Soul Dark Chip, and the one who gave it to her.
一体こんなもの誰が？ドクター・リーガルよ。
ドクター・リーガルだって？
Oh look! That guy that totally looks like the bad guy is actually the bad guy! Before they can get an explanation, Aneta's abducted by Yuriko, meaning we've got to rescue her in the next episode, which is looking to lead into an even larger confrontation, as Shademan's personal dimensional area generator is finished, and Bubbleman's gotten him the direct link to Nebula's private server from his infiltration axe, meaning it's looking to be a three-way brawl for it all next time. The wrap-up. We have soft-hearted revenge scheme to Aneta's role in the story. We have suicide by cop, to Silk and Aneta's backstory. We have I Knew All Along, to Enzan and Neto setting up a sting to turn Yuriko's trap back on them. The reason I didn't comment on Neto's perceived bouts of idiocy that Rockman complained about is it's pretty clear in retrospect that Neto was following Enzan's lead in this confrontation of whatever Aneta got herself involved in, and Neto was just playing up an oblivious role for any observer. Once again at the dead center of the series and helmed by one of the writers that knows what they're doing, we got a really strong character piece out of this one that introduces someone who's going to act as the new main/recurring character for the rest of the series, and a far better paramour of interest for Enzan than the mess with Yaito, as it's far stronger as a personal story between the complications they have with their history and the means by which it is overcome and likewise paralleled, a lot of which comes from the events immediately following from it. For there was another big plotline directly lifted from Battle Network 4 that was wise for them to capitalize on, and capitalize on it they did. Continuing on from last time, Enzan and Neto rush off to confront Regal, both of them frustrated that they just didn't see it. It's the monocle, dude. Never trust anyone with a monocle, especially if it's cybernetic. Well, okay, at least not ones that have them set in them like Regal does. And it turns out he was at a familiar location too, that aquatic hotel from the first season. Good callback. The thing is, though, he never used the place. All that's there is a computer with freight shipping manifests, whose visits to port happen to coincide with surges in dark chip distribution. The closest ship isn't far off the coast, meaning it's likely where Neto was taken. And this mess so rattling Enzan that he's not just accepting that Neto's being part of this, he's asking Neto for help.
一緒に来てくれるかお前の力が必要だ
当たり前だ
A long way away from the character he was a year and a quarter ago. Sure enough, they reach the freight liner and see Yuriko's helicopter atop it, alongside dimensional area converters mounted into the ship's superstructure, meaning they were expected. Then barely managing to get on board before the area's barriers clip their helicopter's wings, and they're surrounded by viruses that were actually sent by Shademan. Yes, Shademan has begun his own coup against their benefactor at last, though it's not exactly clear initially which one of the dueling antagonists set up the dimensional area, considering Shademan's work on constructing his own. But yeah, it was Shademan, as Regal just wanted to talk. Regardless, with the field up, Neto and Enzan can cross-fuse and deal with the viruses, which are just one massive delay in getting to Regal. And it kind of shows how short-sighted Shademan continues to be, that doing this is all that he thinks would be enough to unseat the man who has manipulated them all from the start. Still, you can hear the anger in Enzan's voice as Neto starts to use some of his battleships to speed up getting to Aneta. As well it makes it easier, well, why would he yell? They can reload their active memory, as Neto's shown before, to get around their 5-chip limit in between breaks in battle, like they have right after this, before they encounter Yuriko here. She invites them deeper into the ship, with them directed straight to Regal.
いかにもこの私だ。
なぜだ
おっと、迂闊に近づくと、この子が危険だよ。
That's not really answering his question, dude. I mean, I know what's going on with the anime version of Regal, but we're not there yet. But yeah, it's exposition time at last. First off, yes, the Darkloids, as suspected, were spontaneously created navis created from remnant ghost data of deleted ones amalgamating into new ones, similar to how data viruses have come about in the .exe timeline. Yuichiro was spearheading development of means to fight such wild navis in part tied to his synchrochip research, while Regal in turn got the idea to just use them, and with Shademan's assistance found the source of the dark aura they generate, leading to the dark ship's development as a massive hyperpower condensed source of such. And while Shademan just wants to rule the world without any concept of what that would entail...
You don't want to take over the universe, do you? No. You wouldn't know what to do with it, beyond shout at it.
Well, Regal has bigger plans than just world conquest. Are you sure? 'Cause knowing what I do about later, it's basically indistinguishable from that. But regardless, Regal has already won his war against Shademan. His dark chip corruption has already enslaved all the Darkloids and subjugated them to Regal's will. Shademan's the only free one of them left. And thanks to the dimensional area diversions, he's got them all directing their aggression the wrong ways. It's also revealed that the dimensional area tech, yeah, that actually came from Wily, or at least the idea for them. Wily could never get them to work, so scrapped that plan in favor of others revolving around controlling Pharaohman, as we've seen. Which is a detail I just do not like. After all, from everything we've seen, Wily didn't like how the World Network was developed and his terrorist goals were all about means by which to destroy it. Creating dimensional era converters to realize cyberspace data? That feels rather hypocritical. Like, maybe as a means to turn others against the World Network before it became ubiquitous so people could focus on the real things in front of them, but that doesn't really work for me. Before we can get the revelation that Regal is Wily's son, though, Shademan shows up and goes straight on the attack and revenge, only for our heroes to get in the way. Regal is, after all, human, and no matter what he's done, he has to go through the human legal system and not be summarily murdered. Ha! Just wait. Karma is an apt description for his ultimate end. Actually, for Enzan, it's because Aneta was in the line of fire. He's gotten rather obsessed rather quickly about her safety, which of course gave the shippers and the audience immense fodder. Their interference makes Shademan decide to deal with the two net savers first, which is where the problem comes in that Shademan can still kick their asses.
Cannon! Sword! High cannon! Wide sword! Mega cannon! Zeta cannon! Long sword! Dream sword! Ike! Cry!
Even them doubling up program advances doesn't do much more than rip off one of Shademan's arms, despite the blowback both suffer from being in proximity to the resultant blast. Even then, with Neto and Enzan disabled, all Shademan does is walk straight past them, too focused on Regal and his revenge. Only, Regal's not actually there. He never has been. Who has is his net navi, Laserman. And none of them were able to tell thanks to Laserman not only being a subservient AI to Regal, but Laserman sharing his voice. Literally, it seems. Well, so much for digital matter not being able to affect the real matter that creates it. Seriously, that was so consistent until now. Actually, no. As remember, these are not Regal's dimensional converters that have those protections built into them, but the ones Shademan constructed. Moreover, Laserman's attack cracked the casing of Shademan's, which is different than attacking the emitters themselves. You can actually break electronics by damaging the case, as it causes the electronics to shift in ways they weren't meant to, which is a more reasonable means by which to disable them. Moreover, the type Shademan uses are dimensional converters that were realized from cyberspace themselves, meaning the emitters themselves are digital constructs, thus not applicable to that cannot damage the emitters rule we've seen thus far. Regardless, it's damaged enough that the dimensional area starts to destabilize, logging all the viruses and Shademan himself off of the real world, and allowing the boys to rescue Aneta. Unfortunately, we're not at the happy resolution yet. Shademan deciding that if Regal's not going to face him, he'll just blow up the ship he's on and leave it at that for his victory. He's not on the ship. He never was. One of the good things about Regal throughout this season, he's always one step ahead of everyone because he keeps active tabs on what everyone is doing, thus knows how to respond instead of thinking that his enemies are beneath him. As opposed to his game counterpart where he ultimately devolves into being a muhahaha, evil be thou my good, nonsense antagonist. No, Anime Regal for the most part is smart, and always looking to play the angles he can to get ahead, and even revealing himself and being briefly part of things by masquerading among the good guys is all working towards his ultimate end goals. If he doesn't get rid of his enemies this time, oh well, try again, as long as the other things I'm working on are progressing. He eventually loses that cool and control later on, but for more understandable reasons with regards to him just not being able to accept the losses he suffers despite, in his mind, doing everything right that should have allowed him his win. Granted, that's all for later, At the moment, with Yuriko taking the only remaining working helicopter, Enzan, Neto, and Aneta are trapped on board a ship Shademan's looking to explode. Thus stopping him is the bigger priority.
無駄だ無駄だ
I mean, he was in JoJo's. However, with time short and their navies that outmatched by even an injured Shademan, well, Neto thinks there's only one option.
ダークチップを使ったらお前はこのまま全滅するよりマシだよお願いだネト君ダークチップスロットイン
Blue's going mad with the dark aura gives Rockman the time to stop the system from exploding. But unfortunately, due to how that specific dark chip was designed to immediately birth a dark soul in its host, well, Blues is losing control of himself fast. With the last of his sense of self, though, he asks them to delete him. Instead of doing so, however, Rockman's ultimate program manages to save his true self as backup, inside of, yes, the definitive soul unison, Blue's soul, which manages to one-shot Shademan with the sonic boom it unleashes. But unfortunately, this has caused Blues to be immediately taken over by the Dark Soul, lost to parts unknown. Shademan returns to his throne, only to find Laserman having taken over, and found the synchro chip data Shademan had previously stolen a long while back, which is needed for the next phase of Regal's plan. All while Shademan surrounded by his former subordinates, and left for dead by all of them.
貴様を
The wrap-up. We have big villain reveal, for Regal owning up to being the bad guy, while at the same time showing off how strong his Navi is in comparison to everyone else. We have come to the dark side, for Blues being consumed by the Dark Soul. To be fair, that was Regal's ultimate plan throughout this, you just don't expect the twists and turns the bait and switch of these episodes invoke. We've got I've Got Soul, for the acquisition of Blues, aka Proto Soul. And not in a fun way to get it, considering its primary use for the near future will be the means by which Neto and Rockman will have to fight their rival Navi that's forcibly been turned evil, initially to save their lives. This is one of the major Wham episodes of the series, due to this having major consequences up and down the story. With Blues now in enemy hands, and working for them on top of it, it means Enzan can no longer join in on the cross-fusion fights, leaving Neto and Rockman at even more of a disadvantage than they may have been before, with the possibility for backup. The preceding episodes had shown how much the True had grown as people and in their respect for one another, and it finally begins a proper character arc for Enzan, as he's brought into focus to actually need to progress down one again. As I've charted, yes, he has softened and become better than the seemingly arrogant, dismissive jerk you could have read him as from the start of the series. But here, he has more than anything else finally provided a motivation for him to improve himself in ways he had blocked himself to. As has been discussed before inside the show, Enzan and Blues' relationship was of a master and a servant, with signs they viewed the other as more than that, but both were unwilling to push for more. We see here as Blues has turned against them those signs that they'd wished they'd made that push, to be more like Neto and Rockman in how they interacted. Just at the moment, they're prevented from doing so, and in part because Enzan was so driven to make up for a failure towards someone else as well. And as I said, this entire arc for them is all about consequences and fallout, as now he has to find a new way to fight and contribute, all while having a personal story to get his Navi and friend back. But that arc isn't pushed to the side just yet. After all, you really think they weren't going to try at all to see if they couldn't make an attempt to recover him early? So fun fact with this one. If you tried Google searching this episode's title, Wavering Heart, before 2020, you got one of the background tracks to Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. After 2020, pages and pages of walkthroughs on an insufferable Final Fantasy VII Remake side quest. With Blues gone, Enzan can no longer act in fulfillment of his duties as a net saver, thus just goes back to work as the vice president of IPC. But even then, it seems like he's doing naught but go through the motions. Still, Neto passes by, wanting to talk with him and see if he can't return an old, long-owed favor in helping him get Blues back, just as Enzan played part in him getting Rockman back almost 60 episodes ago. Look, just call Kent and he'll pull a fist of morality, and he'll be as right as rain. You can even ask him to use the Battle Riser if you want.
夢はまた作れる。でも友達は失ったら二度と戻らない。プログラムと違って人生には無駄も必要だってことをお前に教えてもらったぜ。
俺はたかだか20億の契約を取るだけの副社長に過ぎない。
That's $20 million after conversion, in 2005 money terms. And yeah, Enzan does want Blues back, but he knows there's no easy way back, at the moment, from dark chip corruption. At best, Blues would be locked up in quarantine, with Enzan still not being able to help Neto and Rockman fight as he did before. Thus, he feels it might have been better if he just did other things dissociated from the job, to not be underfoot, as he does trust Neto to be able to fight. Worse, Neto checked on the progress Silab's made on creating a vaccine chip, and they're no closer than when they started. Whatever the corrupted program in the chips is, it is somehow black-boxed inside the program of the chip itself, and they're having no luck in cracking it. Rockman, though, tries in his own way to help Enzan as well. The Soul Unison system that allowed Rockman to save a part of Blues within him, seeming to resonate more openly with his feelings, making Rockman want to provide some solace to Enzan, even though they're not having an operator, merely synchronized with those feelings that Blues actually had. And in its own way, it does seem to help. The Dark Lloyds, however, are not as joyful about the shifted status quo as one might think either, as despite just joining their ranks, Blues has been promoted above all of them into Nebula's active Navi field commander, it taking one of them being outright deleted to get it through their heads that what Laserman and Regal say is the law. Some join the dark side for the cookies, others do it for the brownie points. Enzan goes to see Aneta in the hospital, recovering there from her kidnapping, which affected her physically worse than what was previously shown. That or her old injuries weren't quite healed yet when Nebula involved her, with Aneta openly regretting her part in Blues' corruption. And goddamn, this is a very well-staged moment with the pair interposed like that. One of the strengths of this episode is it's very atmospheric, appropriately dwelling on the helplessness the cast feels in being unable to save one of their own from what's been done to them, and accenting it with an appropriate melancholic mood as they all independently try to work through it. This is the fourth, and sadly last for this season, episode directed by Harume Kosaka, and it frankly shows far better what they can do than the previous ones by, you know, not bogging down their episodes with nonsense, but actually telling an appropriately paced story with regards to losing someone you care about, and how someone feels about that loss plays a big part in that. So allowing the runtime to actually focus on conveyance of that emotion, and having a director that knows how to deliver that, it's important. Also, look at what Enzan brought. White roses. White roses! Since the Dot Hack reviews, I've looked a bit more into flower symbology, and man are white roses one of the bigger ones. Given to someone in mourning, they can represent wanting to comfort them, but given to others out of that context, it can represent devotion, and even young love or affection. So yeah, another point for the shippers here. Still, we can't dwell on this forever, as Nebula has targeted a model who's trying to get distributed a line of clothing that has computer processors woven into their make. Wow, I can't even begin to imagine how expensive those are. Thus making her next fashion show be under tighter security with Neto also on hand. The model, Eve, showing off for Neto the capabilities of her line, with the models able to use the processors to generate soft light holograms. Still kinda silly though, as the reason we don't try to make stuff like that wearable is, well, body contact with all our skin oils and perspiration can cause corrosion to circuitry over time. Getting electronics wet is always a bad thing, and you'll have to wash the clothes at some point, and flexible circuitry? I've had to work with those with some of my models like the NGX Unicorn, and every point where a circuit bends, that is a new point of failure. Now, if the wearable computers are just all about those brooches that contain a computer core with other accessories that interface with it, that's something different than what is being described initially, as they keep saying it's the clothes themselves and not just the accessories. Worse for this, Nebula's stunt is just a feint to get at an aerospace and tech research office, which is housed in a building that is attached to where Eve's fashion show is taking place, which fits for their general subterfuge schemes too. Make the heroes be too focused on one thing to realize Nebula's goal is entirely different. Though to complicate matters with Neto being on assignment, who should show up for the show but Male? And this would make more sense if we'd actually seen Male be consistently fashion-inclined. But, well, there are only so many cast members, so Male has to take the designated girl hit on this one. Worse, her meeting with Neto distracts him, so he doesn't notice the Darkloid Sparkman using the accessories as remote terminals with which to hijack the models' bodies and infiltrate the lab. The soft light hologram interface allowing Sparkman to remote hack their way in, thus allowing them to raid it far more subtly than would otherwise be possible with the dimensional areas, which would immediately tip off everyone. The various properties of the devices meant for fashion effects actually working to screw over all the implanted security, which rather shows the creativity of just how far the plot of the week is going with just the idea of portable soft light holograms. Kenichi Yamada was behind the story on this episode, and this makes me wonder, what the hell is up with the inconsistency with this guy? As he does keep writing awful episodes of this show, but then every now and then, we get one like this. In looking back at his awful ones, well, I can't help but feel the problem might be he's bad at comedy, as there is no comedy to this one. Hell, there isn't even a chance for a Neto's an idiot insult remark to slip in here. The front half is focused on Enzan's melancholy. The back half is focused on the villain plot of the week. There's no chance for the caustic comedy aside to take over, as has been his Achilles heel in the previous ones we discussed, alongside Yamada's preference for repeatedly redundant and repetitive fill-the-time dialogue that is still present here. Still, the second the power goes out, Neto realizes something's up, and immediately gets ambushed by the hypnotized models. It takes time for them to get free after that, in between which it's realized Yuriko had actually set this all up by impersonating Eve using her physical data in the wearable computers, which vastly expands her ability to infiltrate to unheard levels, which unfortunately is never seen again. With her goal here being to, in fact, gain access to all the world's satellites from data in the system, which Enzan, having caught on to what was going on before anyone else when he heard of where the fashion show was moved to, has already removed.
手の込んだやり方だな。
ナビを失ったにしては元気なようね。
お前たちが休む暇も与えてくれないからな。
Still, they escape this as Roll's antenna can emit a counter note to the supersonic vibrations that's the root of the model's hypnotized state, disrupting it long enough for Neto to finally get a chance to send Rockman some battle chips.
Sonic Boom!
With this, the models are freed, but Yuriko escapes, with assistance from Blues, who taunts his former friends with his full shift in loyalty before leaving himself. The wrap-up. We have Get Your Groove Back to Enzan, as he tries to find his way without his partner, and realizing how much it meant for him to be there. We have subtle shipping, for the visual theme stuff between Enzan and Aneta. We have Fashion Disaster, to the Nebula plot of the week and them hijacking a fashion show to do it. And the same, but applied differently, to Roll in her cybernet clothing that actually ends up hindering her from fighting. And we have redundancy offices of redundant offices, for Kenichi Yamada's dialogue issues. Continuing the Dark Blues arc makes this an important episode, but one of the more skippable ones past the point it stops being about Enzan's moroseness, since that's picked up better in the next episode. The plot of the week isn't bad either in its plotting or execution, but the actual dialogue is the hindrance here. Still, for what we've seen from Yamada thus far, it's certainly one of his better ones. And all I can really ask for sometimes with some writers is some form of improvement. And yes, I am amused by the fact that I can use Mega Ranger jokes this many years later. Enzan, still moping over Blues' loss, visits Scilab to deliver designs for a new PET, one that might work to immunize Navis from Dark Chip's infection simply by them preventing the corrupted chips from being able to be transferred to a Navi. Problem is, in working to prevent that type of transfer, it's also messed up the entire battleship transfer system installed on the PET. So you made the firewall a bit too thick then. This is why they brought it to Scilab, though. Since Yurichiro's team has been working tirelessly on trying to create a cure for the Dark Soul, and Yuichiro basically designed the battleship system to begin with, they figured Yuichiro's team might have better luck blocking only dark chip data by helping them with the recognition filter part of the hardware, alongside the vetting of a second device meant for even more specialized use that Scilab's been working on, the battleship gate, which will allow Neto and Rockman to get around the 5-chip limit they're stuck with while in cross-fusion. I did say they'd eventually showcased a way around it. There's more here too, as Yuichiro has managed to get a complete analysis of Dark Soul put together. But surprisingly, it was one of the rare times he actually went home to sleep in his own bed instead of work, meaning the disk with the data is with Haruka at home. Unfortunately, since Blue still has all the Axess data for IPC in his system, he's been able to spy remotely on their design of the device, meaning Regal's in on it too. And install actually getting the disk to a safer place than their house, well, Haruka has to mom for Enzan, considering he's without. And Haruka has been made aware from her husband and son the hard time Enzan has been having, thus feels it's up to her to give him a moment to just breathe. Speaking of, I have zero idea what was up with Enzan's mom in any of the Battle Network continuities. I guess we can always write it off as the often utilized missing parents trope, but still to excuse it as that has more and more come to feel like it's lazy. Yes, these parents are superfluous to the story that is being told, so this is a detail that doesn't necessarily matter, but, well, there's only so many times you can see such where the other parent does matter before it gets annoying. This is the second of 3 episodes this season by Naoko Marukawa, and it is unfortunately like them to unnecessarily eat time with these kinds of diversions. Well, yes, Enzan needed time to decompress so he doesn't stay mopey. Well, you can only do that for so many episodes where it's dwelled on before it starts to overstay its welcome, and weaken the strength of the larger arc about Blues going bad and its consequences. Scenes like this that stretch and stretch on are part and parcel to undermining a stronger arc with how it overstays its welcome, and Marukawa's means of time filling certainly does that, as there's a good several minutes where nothing happens, or it just regurgitates elements of this story that have already been addressed. At best, we get the return of arrogant Enzan when Neto returns home, sees Enzan there, and tries to apologize for his part on Blues being dark-souled. But the way Enzan is then portrayed as turning his nose up at the apology just acts as cover for how bad he feels, and taking advantage of their old rivalry to intentionally anger Neto into blowing him off. But this is different than how we've seen Enzan before, and why he looked down on Neto before, since they've long moved past that point between them. At best, it is another showcase of how awful he feels about the loss of Blues, and trying to get everyone off his back over it as he knows he has to move on. But both his own feelings and everyone around him with how they're treating him won't let him. It's doing as much harm as intended good to walk on eggshells around him, and would have been a far better execution of this story if he were to just openly admit he was sick of it, instead of it devolving into a fist fight that leads to his own personal breakdown, as this wasn't the right way to deal with it. Maybe, had the previous episode actually dealt with this directly, instead of effectively acting as filler, it would have worked better, as opposed to stretching the storyline out. But the way it is, like I said, this part of the story arc is overstaying its welcome. Regardless, Neto impresses on Enzan the need for him to fight with everything he has for what's important to him, not just abandon and destroy it, which comes into play when IPC's research center is wrapped in a dimension area, which materializes Gravity Man as a distraction while Blues logs onto the server to raid it for the new PET data. Enzan manages to stall Gravity Man by baiting him into attacking support pillars that bring parts of the building down on the realized Navi, showing once more that even without cross-fusion, that he can still fight as long as he's clever. But that's not the most effective against a Navi that freely controls gravity, even if he is as dumb as a post. With Neto taking Gravity Man's attention, Enzan is then free to take manual control of IPC's security system with remote trigger battle chips, with him only having to stall Blues for 5 minutes like this before he'll be able to transfer the PET data off of the server and out of their hands. Neto succeeds in disabling Gravity Man by Enzan likewise informing him of his earlier tactic of literally dropping the building on the Darkloid.
人の会社だと思って。
Neto is going to be in debt for life, and he's not even in his teens yet.
ネット君が破壊した施設の分も足したら60億くらいにはなるよ。
ロックマン余計なこと言うなよ。
Good thing they have insurance! Though to be fair, this was Enzan's idea to start with. You can't exactly blame him for the execution when what he threw at Gravity Man was the heaviest object available. With Gravity Man dispatched and Blues losing access to their target, today is actually a full-on failure for Nebula. But Blues says to Enzan's face, and Enzan declares right back, that this won't stay like this in the future.
俺は見失わないからな。必ずお前を連れ戻してやる。
お前は大事な実験体だからな。どうだね。お前はもうネットナビではない。世界を牛耳る新たな種族。ダークロイドとして生まれ変わったのだ。
The wrap-up. We have Cycle of Grief, for Enzan coping with losing Blues. We have Redundancy Office of Redundant Offices, for this side plot eating up another episode when it really should have been addressed in one. We have Gravity Falls, and thus by proxy, Outwitted by a Child in Short Pants, for a double allusion to said Disney series, to Gravity Man having heavy things dropped on him. We have Greater the Light, Longer the Shadow, for Blues no longer being dark-souled, but that Dark Soul creating an entire new Darkloid, which will be Blues' standard look for the rest of the season. Of the three malicious forms of the protagonist Navis we see in this series, Darkblues.exe is my favorite, as it just makes him look just that much more extra. And his former suit-like style becoming actual armored pieces with appropriate curves and edges to them. It's not a huge difference, but it is enough to make it pop. While this episode does important things for the arc, like I was saying throughout it, a lot of that is redundant to the last episode, which harms it. And I'm split on whether it's this one or the last episode's fault. Kenichi Yamada's storytelling is overall worse on the matter than it is here, but the last episode's directing by Harume Kosaka vastly elevated the direction of it, so it feels stronger in addressing Enzan's moroseness over it, despite this episode doing more with it to actually resolve his feelings into a will to fight for what's important. The two together are harmful, as they both pad their stories out so that the entire Enzan character arc of his feelings of grief is stretched out long past the point it is welcome, when that part that split between both episodes could easily have been placed into just one. Had the monoplot been just its own episode, it likely would have sucked, but by proxy the only thing buoying it up is the plot that would have been better had it been centralized in this episode alone. And between Naoko Marikawa, which fully fleshed out Enzan's work to actually deal with it, I'd rather her episode here have been the one to stay, so watching those back-to-back isn't so frustrating. As without the previous one bogging it down, this one does it better. Had it been paired with Harume Kosaka's directorial skill, it likely would have been much more of a standout than it ends up being. But as is again my thesis for this series, have the writing staff keep shooting the larger, stronger, and better storyline in the foot with their own issues. We have finally hit the episodes that were skipped in the US broadcast of the season. Yeah, can you believe it took them that long this time? Though to be fair, of the 6 that were skipped, this was the only one of them to air in Canada, and thus would have gotten a rerun on Cartoon Network later on, if I were at all paying attention to it at that point. If memory serves the week this would have gotten the re-airing at an off time, I was off at a family reunion I was dragged to, where ironically I was busy playing Battleworld 5 on my GBA. Because, you know, timing! Regardless of that, amidst a Nebula attack on Net City caused by a Navi infected with Dark Soul, Aquaman ends up saved from certain doom by Rockman, leading to the young-minded Navi becoming a bit fixated on his senior, and in a bit of a clingy way at that.
離れてくれないんだよ。
Katsuhiko Chiba brought us this one, and admittedly between a few recurring plot points between Outlaw Star, Gundam Wing, and a couple other series of his I've liked, I kind of feel like he has a thing for characters that imprint on others. Still, because this has set itself up directly as a comedy filler episode plot, it's better than the bad sect that always relies on bashing a character for their yucks. This is how you're supposed to do humor. Person versus self. Person versus person. Person versus society. person versus nature. Insulting a character by mischaracterizing them does nothing but harm that content and the creator that does such, as has long been my thesis with the anime's problems. But here, this fits Aquaman to do this, and unintentionally makes himself a nuisance because the Navi's too naive to know better. And this fits with his depiction in his prior appearances, where he unintentionally causes problems for those around them. See? This is what I've been talking about all season that the bad staff have not been doing.
ごめんなさい。どういうこと？シュウコさんたら？
Soon! Actually, this is the first time Male's been allowed to be a tsundere in quite a while. It's almost as if half the staff forgot that was a character trait of hers. But yeah, part of the problem with this episode, and for once I mean that in respect of the internal problem that the characters have to resolve as part of the plot, and not in regards to the construction of the story itself, is that Aquaman legitimately doesn't want to leave Rockman anymore. But that's dangerous since despite how powerful Aquaman can be at times, well, against the Dark Lords and Nebula agents, he is at best a liability. Thus they need to convince Aquaman to separate from his personal hero and return to Shuko where it's safer. And also so it'll make it safer for Shuko, as with her constantly in Neto's personal space, Male's getting all riled up. Fortunately to show this, Burnerman's run out of dark ships, so gets an assignment from Laserman in exchange for more, which has them specifically target Rockman to get him out of their way. This then conflicts with the efforts to remove Aquaman from being attached to the hip, with them initially trying a game of hide-and-seek to trick a separation, which they believe will end in Aquaman going back to Shuko, forgetting entirely that when Aquaman gets sad, the waterworks start flooding. But because Burnerman threatens a manufacturing plant, well, hide-and-seek gets interrupted, and Aquaman's refusal to stay behind ends up infuriating Burnerman, as Burnerman's call-out demanded a fair one-on-one fight.
Pew!
Yeah, that's the face you make when you realize you're going to die in a comedy episode as a B-plot.
じゃあ、私も離れない。アクアマンが離れないなら、私だって離さないもん。ふざけるな！待て！
I unironically love this episode so damn much. Still, Burnerman, charbroiling Rockman finally gets into his head that, hey, maybe Aquaman's nonsense is actually making problems for him. As Rockman's efforts to get away from him lead the two into the Furnace Network, where Burnerman entirely isolates Rockman from Axess by Neto to send him battleships or souls, simply because this network is isolated due to the heat and molten metals around it, making it extremely difficult to get to. But Aquaman following, as said, only ultimately makes him a liability, as then Rockman has to switch from hit-and-run tactics that might eventually wear Burnerman down on his own to defensive ones to protect the far too oblivious Aquaman. It's only when they're about to die that, of course, Rockman's expected Deus Ex Machina appears, and Aquaman's wish to save his savior generates Aqua Soul. And with Rockman now a water elemental, well, Burnerman, even with a dark chip advantage, isn't getting past his elemental weaknesses. Especially now with the attack power doubling Aqua Soul features, once Neto can finally send battle chips. Probably better than in the games, where the soul form barely has a use. However, as is the resolution to a comedy plot, Aquaman has his moment with Rockman, so is more willing to let him be free to live his life. But the problem is, since Roll dived over to save him from the tail end of the battle, well, it looks like Aquaman's now imprinted on her, thus repeating the cycle of Aquaman needing to learn that, dude, they're just not that into you. The wrap-up. We have the Clinger to Aquaman and his infatuation with Rockman, and eventually Roll in this episode. We have I've Got Soul, for another Blue Moon Soul unison getting spotlights. The tail end of the season that we're in now starts to blitz in a few more of the forms, since they still had half of them to go, and quite a lot of them are in filler episodes like this, taking out very Darkloids. Their execution varies, though. We have The Witch Dies in Water, to Burnerman's body literally falling apart for the blast of the Aqua Shot. I gotta admit, this was a lot more gruesome than I expected, even with as bloodless as the destruction was presented. Just the showcase of his limbs and body cracking like that has its own charm to his ultimate breakdown and defeat. But it goes to show that sometimes you just need to go Water Tribe on a guy to get him to go down. This one is actually better than it might seem from the outset with Aquaman's obsession, and I think what helps with that is Aquaman, by his presented mental age, is that of a very young kid, and thus it retains an innocence that is lost if his actions were done by anyone older or larger. If this were, say, Gutsman, then it'd be really, really creepy. But as he's childlike, it just ends up with the guy not seeming to know better. And even better, everyone around him acknowledges that it's not right for him to act like this, but due to his childlike mind, they can't convince him to stop with any success. Again, this is important for proper depiction of characters, knowing what can be done with an individual without it being detrimental to the portrayal. We've seen Aquaman's innocent obliviousness before, and while it is a nuisance, it is never truly malicious. Even better, for the short time she's on screen, this does also show some growth with Shuko as well, and that she doesn't act like a completely helpless moping sad sack all this time, but is engaged in trying to get her Navi to listen to reason. She's ultimately still useless in succeeding at that, but she was being better in holding firm to doing her part, which wouldn't have held firm before. In space, no one can stop you from making obscure sci-fi movie references, with this intercut shot of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. Well, obscure today. How many people in my audience have actually seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? Oh god, they even have that mechanical bone that one monkey for that movie threw! Wait. Still, that bone hits a satellite, linked to something stored within it to wake up, and it's not in a good mood. Meanwhile, Mail and Neto are dragged into the antics of yet another meeting of the Hot Springs Club, which leads to nonsense because the hot springs they visited... Look, Yai, what is your aversion to just asking them for help? If you're upfront with them, they're more than likely going to say yes! You keep pulling this shit, then they're at some point going to start refusing. See, even they've wised up to the maker of nonsense here. But then Yai takes this even further, for as I've long said was going to happen... You know, I'm not even exasperated at her owning her own space shuttle at this point. My complaint is, why build all these contraptions under a public bathhouse? Do you have any idea how large the explosion for the thrusters on a space shuttle is? You need to keep them away from any other populated place as you devastate it. Maybe we wouldn't if you weren't useless, Glide. But yeah, why Yaito can do this is... it's actually a Gabcom satellite. Her dad's company has apparently branched into space tech research, and a manned satellite has recently been getting hit by errant debris, collecting around an older weather satellite, endangering the workers on board, which thus required Yaito to call in the best operator she knows to intervene on her behalf. Wow, Yaito, that's actually surprisingly altruistic, to actually care about more than yourself. It's a surprising change of, wait, the episode is just screwing with us. As for the satellites... I'm actually curious if this eventually played any influence on the eventual creation of Gentaro Kisaragi. And yeah, it's occupied by Junkman, where as opposed to his game counterpart, hasn't gotten bitter to the concept of kindness and would like to be on good terms with others. But as he was created from junk data parsed from a breaking down satellite, he doesn't exactly know how. Thus is creating the problems others are experiencing, as he assumes inanimate space junk is all his friends. So we should get him a volleyball named Wilson then? But because he can't comprehend a difference between inanimate and sapient, well, he's after the satellite as one big friend, regardless of the people in it. Where he's getting all the junk though? Well, as Rockman explains inside the episode, ever since the Sputnik launch in the 50s, there have been thousands of objects launched into space, much of which has been abandoned or damaged beyond repair and hasn't fallen back to Earth, on top of the actual satellites we wanted to keep in orbit. That adds up to a lot of debris scattered up there. Hell, in a few hundred years if this continues, there's a hypothesis that the Earth might develop its own junk belt around the planet. This is also another reason why we're fairly sure there isn't extraterrestrial life anywhere in the vicinity of us in our sector of the Milky Way galaxy, to say nothing about it farther out. As with how tech development works, there'd be signs of this around other planets that are close enough to us for telescopes at our current tech level to zoom in on. Granted, space is big, so it's plausible it's around one we might have missed, but scientists have been looking for it. They managed to get on board the main station, and we see the true nuisance Junkman has been in his attempts to claim the Gabcom satellite, as he's been pelting the entire station with his junk friends. And the damage he's dealing is starting to add up, even flinging his own constructed castle at the place, which the group enter on their own to see if they can't deal with this. And inside they find Junkman's actually pretty creative Navi, building his own junk droids that populate it.
しまった。いつの間に人間。友達じゃない。俺の仲間、奪いに来た。
I mean... And yeah, Attack of the Killer Junk Droids ensues, with them having to hunt down a Jack-in port amidst Junkman's attempts to slaughter them. But as Junkman has no first-hand knowledge with humans, well, all he knows is what he gleaned from the internet. And it shows why an AI learning that humanity is evil from the internet is complete and utter garbage as an idea. So, of course, a Navi based around garbage would use it.
地震、雷、火事、親父。世の中の日頃恐れているものを順に並べた言葉ね。
The assembled Navis finally reach Junkman, but with his ability to use the junk around him freely, he easily defends himself from damage. It taking hitting him with the trusty boomerang chip to ultimately injure him, only for him to turn up the pressure of his attacks, and with him disabling roll and glide. Ultimately, they get over the barricade and deal just enough damage to get Junkman to break from battle, and learn he was harming people far worse. And the entire ordeal here is sorted out, with Junkman agreeing to only take trash in space, and not the other satellites out there. And the group returns to planetside, with a new collector of debris helping out the humans in the space above the sky. The wrap-up. We have Forgotten by the Plot, to Toru, where at the end of the episode it's revealed he was still waiting at the abandoned hot spring for everyone else after Yai used him to set this all in motion. We have also Sprach Zarathustra, for the 2001 A Space Odyssey reference. We have Recurrent Nuisance, to Yaito and how she always screws people over, even if she might have a good reason this time. We have In Space, No One Can Hear You, to the Hikari group taking the first of a few trips to actual space, and not just faking it as they did last season. Surprisingly, this episode is harmless, introducing Junkman so the next time he shows up later, he's able to give up junk soul to the assembled arsenal. Help that Junkman here is more misguided than malicious as his game counterpart was. Not much else to say, beyond how, once again, this shows why getting Yaito out of the story was a good idea, as how much extra she can be can really harm any more grounded story the show would attempt to do otherwise. Having her be around every now and then makes such a lot less of an issue, even though the nonsense she pulls is still ridiculous. But it's at least established ridiculous instead of it coming out of nowhere, with the largest hindrance still being the sight gags that are invoked with her that harms the broader sense of consistency with the setting, and go far too far for a comedy gag, which is basically all they are at this point. At the very least, this was more reined in than previous ones, even if it did involve them hiding a spaceship in the middle of town. Which, yeah, that's not a good thing for anyone that knows about rocket science. Ladies and gentlemen, the worst episode of the season. And no, I will not take that back. Unsurprisingly, it is once more a Mayuri Sekijima episode, and it's for the same reason most of Mayuri Sekijima's episodes are awful. Their poor treatment of the cast in order to drive people into being idiots to play part in an idiot plot.
私たちよ。 最後に会ってからもう1年にもなるかしら?
It's not even been 6 months, and that's not even bringing sliding timescale into this. Either you acknowledge them growing up, maturing, and getting responsible or smarter if time is passing like that, or you have to bubble the show in a non-specific period of time. You cannot leave a character stagnant and unchanging in spite of the experiences that promote them to grow, or force them to revert to something they've clearly shown themselves to not be if you're acknowledging a significant passage of time is happening. And here's immediately why this episode is awful. It's rewriting the past on a lot of the nonsense of the previous Commander Beef subplot, with the net agents returning to the region from activities abroad, and Sekijima once more turning Neto into a thoughtless idiot to facilitate the plot around their return.
超びっくりだろみんな。びっくりなのはネットの方よ。そんなのとっくに知ってるわ。そうなの？当然じゃない。
Literally 70 episodes ago, he was going out of his way to prove that fact to you because you didn't believe him! Again, I know it's been a constant complaint I've railed on in the Axess videos, and I know you're all sick of it by this point, but Sekijima's faction of the writing staff do undermine every element of the stories they try to do when they pull this shit. As if they figured it out on their own, they then owed Neto a "you were right" acknowledgement, as he was the one who first brought it up, and it was everyone else around him that told him he was wrong. And Miyuki went out of her fucking way to disguise herself as Mesa to pull a "can't be at two places at once" gambit for them to belittle Neto for that belief previously. You can't pull a "we've known all along it was only you who didn't" gambit for these circumstances without it then assassinating the entire cast for it, as Neto was the one that was right before about it when you all insulted him for saying it. Again, you can't have it both ways. Either you have to treat Neto as being right with an "I told you so" and everything, and you all owe him an apology for berating him into believing it to not being the case, or they have to be just surprised by this revelation, and Neto still has to be treated as in the right. Any other way just makes them all look like assholes for deliberately telling him it's not, while actually knowing Mesa is and was. This is especially egregious, as Sekijima alone has been responsible for this insipid subplot throughout the series. For them to then renege on this element of it when the entire beef bullcrap kept the characters from a mutually respectful bond, it is an entirely new tier of insult for the cast. Hell, Mail in this scene, for their justification on how they figured it out, uses the same logic Neto did 70 episodes ago to out all their identities, as Neto tried to before. This is how bad Sekijima's gotten at this point, just to provide an excuse to bash Neto's character, making him the one in the wrong in any scenario regardless of circumstance, even if previously all evidence in the show should present him as being the one in the right. How does this not make everyone look bad as consequence by them all playing part in enforcing the lie and insulting him for buying into the lie they helped to spread, as they are retconned to have been doing now? You know, I'd like to think that this shit is why Sekijima has not been seen writing anything in years. The last writing credit I have for them was the series Taboo Tattoo, which was awful primarily because Sekijima's scripts for the series gutted what was there for a story. There were a lot of complaints about his adaptation, which did not help the animation company JC staff's reputation as yet another botched adaptation to go alongside Tsukihime, One Punch Man Season 2, A Certain Magical Index Season 3, and Slayer's Revolution R, among others. To push bash the stupid, because it infests everything about this episode, and the episode literally spends the majority of its length pulling even more of this shit, so I'm not even going to bother talking about literally every second about how bad it gets, as it's a concentration of every comedy gimmick that was excised, and with good reason, from most of Axess, and the show would evolve beyond needing part of it. With it all tied to trying to keep Mesa's secret identity as a net agent under wraps from, of all people, Mariko. Because of course, that old bit of unnecessary nonsense was really needed, when that double identity thing in the first place was done at Mesa's insistence, and not required to keep their job as is suddenly insisted upon here. But really, if I did list off every single thing wrong or of irritants here, you'd all get sick of me saying the same thing over and over and over and over again in a single video about it, because it's the same fuck-ups I've just described throughout it, or cited as problems with Sekijima before, and the Commander Beef subplot as a whole, and that it's worthless, and they make the worst excuses of trying to justify it. And I think I've beaten the dead horse that is half of the writing staff treating Neto as brain dead too much as it is. The comedy bits drawn throughout are painfully bad, ranging from revival of the stupid love triangle, the kids thinking Mesa's going to out himself to Mariko finally as he should have dispensed with the secret ID thing back before the show hit the 20s, as it was that fucking worthless, to a whole slow of mistaken identity gags, with of course everyone being an idiot. Regardless, the net agents are back because they've been trailing Goss Magnets, who somehow escaped custody in the aftermath of everything related to Gospel. Goss, in his own attempt to bring the organization back, is trying to meet with Yuriko to get his hands on dark chip supplies, but due to their resemblance, mistakes Mariko for Yuriko while Mesa is out with her, while Mesa almost does the same with Yuriko. Now the thing is, I could believe Goss mistaking Mariko for Yuriko as he's trying to make contact covertly, but the continued insistence after she denies it, and not just this being a mistaken identity case? Sorry, no. Goss is a goofball, but the series has shown he's not a complete imbecile. But again, that's the default for Sekijima. Everyone is an idiot. Except for some reason Mesa in this episode. Hell, for the most part, thanks to the series segmenting all competence of the character to his Commander Beef identity, Mesa actually feels completely out of character here, which wouldn't have happened if they had actually reconciled and edited this unnecessary plot 70 episodes ago. Thus, Mesa has to rescue Mariko from a gun-toting Goss, which is sort of a dilemma for the watching Yuriko. After all, that's her sister right there, and she's just going to let Goss murder her without doing anything? Oh wait, right, this episode is literally that inept that such did not even enter the scriptwriter's mind. And it wouldn't even be character derailment for her with what we see of her later when we actually get an episode about her backstory where Nebula orders her to do it. And she can't. If it weren't for the fact that she's there at that moment. Were she not in the scene at all, or just waiting back at their meeting point assuming Goss is just late and not here as well, then this would be more justifiable. But again, that's not the case. She was just going to watch as her sister died here in a circumstance she could have prevented just by revealing her presence as she was supposed to anyways, but took no action. This is why I hate this episode. Regardless, Goss is confronted, and he suddenly reveals he's in that drag costume from the costume party episode. Oh, and get used to that being another Sekijima running gag for Goss. They love putting him in that dress. And while Rockman and Sharkman are busy dealing with Magnet Man, Goss reveals to his audience, gasp! Commander Beef is Mesa! Again, originally he put on the costume, not to act covertly, but to hide his identity from the kids. His job doesn't require him to do it, he did it himself, and the disguise actively hinders his own efforts. Enforcing the costume and the ID for stupid reasons, including leaving them at a disadvantage when their lives and the lives of actual civilians like Mariko are in danger, is a criminal dereliction of duty and the responsibilities of one's job. No one comes out of this mess unscathed. And what saves them from this? Everyone suddenly dressing up like Commander Beef! Good question! With that mass series of attacks, Goss is defeated and finally arrested, and Mesa, I don't think ever appears again, or at least not that I remember. And as much as I wish this entire subplot had been dealt with far differently, good riddance that it's finally fucking gone. The wrap-up. We have character mass assassination for literally every cast member that appears here. We have idiot plot, as my god is this one. If it's not a textbook example of one, it's damn close. We have The Returner, for a character coming back out of nowhere that wasn't needed back. Admittedly, we did need Saloma back at some point to give up Wood Soul, but that's not happening yet. And we have But I'm a Vegetarian, to my actual, real-life dislike of beef and most meats, as I can't stand the taste or texture of the grand majority of them. But yes, as this is another episode that bashes Neto for literally no justifiable reason, it by default makes this a bad episode. Why it's worse this time is because it ignores everything that's happened previously yet again, and in ways that makes everyone awful to a more egregious degree than any before it. As it's been a long time since I've watched Stream, I don't remember off the top of my head if there's any worse ones there. Sekijima wrote 9 episodes of Stream's run, just under a fifth of that season. But this one is easily in the bottom 5 for the entire run of the series, just for how insulting this part of it is. I actually ended up losing all my copies of Axess's dub episodes in a hard drive failure in 2022, so I could not check the dub to confirm this, but I swear I remember the dub trying to fix this in the script localization by admitting Lan was right about this mess to try and salvage the episode. If they didn't, that's my memory playing tricks on me, but if they did, well, that's them paying more attention to what was written than Sekijima ever seemed to bother to throughout their career. It's sad to think that the legitimately best episode of their entire career ended up in a series where the creative staff refused to put up with their bullshit. Wait, no, that's not sad. That's holding someone accountable for their conduct lest they be fired, which really is what should have been done here. But here's the truly insulting thing about all of this, though. It's a story arc episode. Yeah, Gauss Magnets being caught and jailed is a plot point that ends up being brought up to start a storyline in Rockman's stream. Well, one could assume he was caught post-gospel, and they only needed to address him when his daughter Tesla was brought into the picture, and I'd honestly prefer to think so with it. No, he's put on trial openly, and Tesla has to break him out. That's how she's introduced. And subsequently starts Strain's incarnation of Neo World 3, that ends up going nowhere, only later feeding into the dark Rockman subplot later on, that Sekijima also screwed with. Admittedly, once more, it's been years since I've watched those episodes of Stream, and I've not gotten around to rewatching them to write the reviews of their story yet, so my memory is probably a bit lacking, but I swear Sekijima must have gotten told off about how bad this was, as I do not remember if any of the following episodes gets anywhere near as bad as this. Or they might have finally gotten told off about how badly they were treating the cast. As this is a mess that should not have happened, and has no right to be here like this. With the strides the show did make to become far better, and bear much greater expectations than what is apparent here. Our attention this time turns to Detective Goro Misaki, as writer Kenichi Araki finally returns to putting the show back on the rails. Goro, if you might remember from his first appearance, 32 episodes ago, was the original test subject for Yuichiro's cross-fusion experiments. You know, before Neto got the synchro chip to work. Here, he's shown first helping out a ramen shop owner get out of a scam artist to establish that he and his Navi Prisman are good guys, which begs the question why they've not been involved in the series up until now. The answer, of course, being anime original character. But he crosses paths with our normal heroes when the wider area is hit with a collective series of gravimetric distortions, literally crushing everything around it, and putting Neto in a bind as he falls into one of the sinkholes they create. Of course, caused by Gravity Man's gravity drive. Goro grabbing some available rope and diving into the pit himself to rescue Neto. And man, I could have seen this episode starting badly had Araki not been its architect. I mean, just look at last episode and compare it to here. Neto sees something going crazy, immediately realizes the likely source and jacks Rockman in to address it, and then ends up hit by the field so he falls into danger in the same way anyone could. It's not ragging on him or flanderizing him into being incompetent that causes his need for assistance. It's him being the normal in such circumstances as opposed to being the special. Or as is the bashing interpretation of such, the special ed. But yeah, Goro makes it in the nick of time. His Navi Prisman likewise showing why he was the first cross-fusion candidate, as he is super capable at his net saver duties. More so than even Blues or Searchman were previously shown, with him getting directly at the heart of the matter, and crushing it in a way that saves those affected. And he has been summoned in attack position. Now, I'd love to go more into Prisman's design and what inspired it, as I know something else inspired it. But once more, thanks to the butchering of the Mega Man wiki that occurred in 2019 in relation to all the .exe pages that have made trying to review this show like pulling teeth to give background details about its development, well, whatever was once specifically named about said inspirations has long been gutted, to never have been replaced or backed up. I still to this day cursed the wiki administrator who did that and didn't think to back up the pages they were remodeling, as a ton of information was lost when they did so. Regardless, Prisman is powerful even without Goro able to operate him. Almost on the level of a solo Navi with his weapons that double as both spiked pistons and as cannons, with the ability to pacify enemy Navis by turning them into light prisms that trap them in a light maze. He's strong, and it makes sense for an adult net saver to have a Navi like him. Regardless, he's been out of the picture so long because he normally works at the northeast branch of the net agents further up the nation. And with Enzan Naviless now, well, they needed the backup. Thus, with Kifune coming to Silab to check on the progress of getting the newest weapon in their arsenal operational, said weapon being the battleship gate, he's given a chance to meet his anti-Nebula co-workers properly for the first time, Neto being grateful to have someone so personable now having his back. But we also see a seed within him of something dark. See, Goro's been contracted time and again for cross-fusion research through the various stages of Yurichiro's development of Dimension Area technology. And he's failed every time. And it irks him that such a young kid has such a strong bond with his Navi that he can pull it off. Which can kind of be tied back to how strong Prisman is. Because he has solo strength, he doesn't really rely much on his operator. And thus Goro himself hasn't made the greatest of efforts to sync with and gain a stronger bond with his Navi on an intimate level like some other operators do. Neto and Enzan can do it because they've developed those connections, whereas most other high-tier operators, not so much. Most having specialized more in tricking out the power levels of their Navis to make up for lesser operating capabilities, or, once more exemplified by Prisman, so they can work without the presence of an operator without significantly dampening their stats. Regardless, Goro can't do it, and it frustrates him that a kid at least 10 years his junior has to be his backup solely because he can, as it should not have been up to kids to resolve crises that are the responsibility of adults to resolve. Man, I remember when that was the proper mindset for a bunch of complex issues, as opposed to the expectation of the modern day, where old people who've held power for too long prevent the solutions to easily preventable or resolvable problems from being addressed, simply because those they answer to are either idiots or paying them not to. Regardless, Gravity Man eventually finds his way out of the prism he's trapped in, simply because heavy gravity fields can bend light. While the battleship gate is completed, the episode explaining again about the PET's internal 5-chip slotting limit that hinders a cross-fusion form's ability to respond to realized Navi threats, and the gate being able to resolve that by another operator acting as the means by which to send the cross-fused fighter new chips freely. They tested with Neto fusing up in test circumstances, the gate automatically connecting to the signal of the in-use synchro chip. The problem that's shown with Meijin first trying it out, however, is the gate requires some level of synchronicity between one sending the chips with the gate and the one using them, similar to the synchronicity a normal Navi and operator would have. Otherwise, the timing to send and then form the gear it sends is all wrong. Because Meijin is a researcher and not normally an operator in this incarnation, he doesn't realize this. But Enzan catches on almost immediately that the timing is what's messing this up, and that's why it's not working. Gravity Man's reemergence distracts from this. Goro, baffled it managed to escape the prism, but again, super heavy gravity bends light, so of course a light construct wouldn't hold him forever. Still, the two Navis double-teaming him shows what a great asset Prisman can be to their battles. At least, right up until the point dimensional areas get involved, sealing them in.
Gravity hard out.
And this is why enemies that screw with gravity are such a big deal, kids. Seriously, doesn't matter the series, it's always shown to be something that screws with people. It's a top-tier ability. Neto, of course, cross-fuses, with Enzan getting the battleship gate working. As Neto, in order to save himself and Goro from certain death, didn't have the opportunity to slot any battleships that would actually be able to get around Gravity Man's barrier ability, thus only leaving behind what was in active memory. Likewise, leaving Goro feeling useless on the sidelines, until he's approached by Rin with a different voice? Yeah, Yuriko in disguise. Makes sense she'd have more fake faces than just masquerading as her sister. Regardless, Enzan arrives with the gate, and makes use of the single most broken chip in the franchise to save him, having figured out the timing issue, and thus putting him back in the battle network.
ストーンキューブスロットインハイキャノントリプルスロットインギガキャノン
But despite Gravity Man's deletion, well, they have more problems in the form of Dark Blues making his appearance, shocking them all with the form change. And subsequent attacks seeming to do nothing to him thanks to his dark aura. Blues disappearing as the dimensional area converter shut down, and leaving Enzan once more in a short-lived state of blue screen. Wait a second. Damn it, why did I only think of that pun just now? However, Nebula has gotten their goal. As with the area down, they have a new pawn they can use. The wrap-up. We have dramatic entry, with how the show introduced Goro Misaki. We have gravity powers are broken, showing the true power Gravity Man possesses. Seriously, all known physics breaks down in the presence of a high enough gravity field. The fact Gravity Man as a Darkloid enemy has lasted as long as he has is actually a testament to how dangerous he is. Think about it if he was actually smarter. As always, when Araki is actually around to write actual episodes of the series he's in charge of, this one's very strong in place of the active story arc the series is working on. New and returning characters are treated appropriately, and we even see some new shakeups to the expected dynamics emerge to help in telling the story. For as short as his presence is as well, it also makes you wish that Goro had had a chance to be a recurring character previously. But we'll be seeing why he's not sticking around that long next time, as the second arc of the season reaches its conclusion. Continuing from last time, a bank's network ends up robbed of its deposit data by Prisman and Goro, who now happen to have bags under his eyes.
第一容疑者として警察署まで一緒に来てもらいたい。
嫌だと言ったら
Man, he almost looks like a Go Nagai and Ken Ishikawa protagonist in this shot. All he's missing is the sideburns. And then, the dimensional area generators manifest.
俺の力を見せてやるダークシンクロチップスロットイン
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious this was going to happen sooner or later. Regal had to do something with all the synchro chips he stole. It makes sense researching how they and dark chips would interact would be an eventual result of such. And Goro Misaki is his first test of the fusion of the two technologies. Knowing that Goro was a previous subject that could get a synchro chip to work, even if his sync rate was too low for it to stay stable, and profiled him to be envious of the two that were capable of cross-fusion, it's an easy way in to first swaying him into proximity, and then using him as a lab rat. Hell, it wouldn't surprise me if this were also why he briefly infiltrated their group to get first-hand data on the process, and wanted to snag Blues or Rockman with a previous Dark Soul incident for further data mining on how the process affects Navis and their operators, to successfully corrupt the bond both ways, and allow a dark chip to corrupt not just the Navi, but also its operator. As I've said about Regal, the man does not operate a one-dimensional plan. There are always multiple reasons behind why he's performing an action, and they all lead into them being for his own ultimate personal gain. And as frustrating as the filler episodes can get in this show with the bad writers among the staff, note that not once has Regal's character been impugned. No, the show waits until after his first massive defeat for him to go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, so it comes more off as a sanity break moment, much like the meme lord Shindan Kurotoshin from Compilation, who I swear was partly based on Regal due to Epsiode as a series taking rather heavy inspiration from the Rockman anime. Anyways, Goro's crime spree immediately grabs everyone's attention, but while cross-fused, he's immune to police-issued bullets. Yes, he is shot at, so gets away. This all gets back to the Net Police, who are all baffled by this. As before now, he's had a perfect record. So, something had to have happened in the last 2 days to cause such change. And they figure, correctly, that it has to do with dark chips. But with the test on Goro using it complete, Yuriko has more jobs for him to fulfill. Neto being in the area of his next attack, and has to rescue the endangered bystanders, and even police that are in way over their heads.
大丈夫。二人は気絶してるだけみたい。
クロスアウト。クロスフュージョンを手に入れた俺は無敵だ。誰も俺を止められない。
Yeah, this is why Regal needed a lab rat before using these on himself. Much like with Navi's, the stress of both the dark chip and the secret chip on his body, especially because of his low secret rate, have catastrophically damaging effects on Goro's body as they overstress it to ridiculous levels. Especially as neither have been calibrated for his proper use like Neto and Enzan's normal chips were. However, Enzan, who saw the dimensional area form and fall, happens across him in investigation of what happens, and gets Goro to a hospital, entirely separate from his PET or his corrupted chips. At this point he is restrained, but sans regular use, it seems like he's coming back to himself. The series once again treating the use of the dark chips as a really bad drug trip for a human in regards to this. He's interrogated about what happened, at least as much as he can remember, and explains how they used his dream to fuse with his Navi against him so everyone's on the same page. As this is so dangerous, they're not going to charge him criminally, but Goro's likely going to face some form of punishment for this. However, Yuriko finds where they've hidden him, and Prisman is sent to get back their pawn. Even using the medical equipment to transmit into Goro's body, the same stimuli used at the Dark Secret chip does to turn him evil again. And worse, after he escaped the hospital, Yuri and Mari's resemblance put the two in crossing paths of the other when Goro mistakes her for her sister, causing Mariko to once again see her and consider the possibility that her sister may be alive. However, with Dark Secret chip back in hand and its dimensional area going up, Goro's allowed to rampage as his worst self, requiring Neto come in to stop him. But because Neto's fighting another living person, he hesitates. Rampaging viruses, Navis, and Darkloids is one thing. Most can be restored from backup in the worst case if there's no other way to get them to stop. Human lives, though? You're playing without continues. Thus, there's a greater threat that in trying to stop them, that Neto could unintentionally maim or kill a man who he knows is normally a good person. And having that awareness of self is a good thing. Oh, I've bashed characters for being wishy-washy in similar circumstances, but the big difference between, say, the incompetent Shinji Kido in Ryuki and Neto here is, 1, Neto's a kid, 2, Goro's only dangerously superpowered as long as the dimensional area is up, and yet Neto still fights to stop his rampage permanently, and 3, Neto actually makes use of a strategy that will disable his enemy without having to kill them, which will take him off the board, as opposed to Shinji where none of those applied, and that characters' refusal to make the choices that would save people's lives actually end up costing more people's lives as a consequence, making him a bigger villain than the individual who put the entire plot of his series in motion. Since if the villain had had his way and Shinji not forced the conflict the show was about to drag out as it did, far fewer people would have died, since the total kill count the villain originally planned to have happen if everything went as it was supposed to was just 12, and not the thousands if not millions it ended up being in Ryuki. When the actions or inaction of a virtuous protagonist makes them end up being responsible for more deaths than your villain, you kind of have a hard time selling them as being a hero. Regardless, to prevent his son from ending up a murder by accident, Yuricho reveals the one weakness of the synchro suits. The Navi emblem is where the core processor of the PET is stored. Strike it hard enough and the damage will translate to breaking the PET and shutting cross-fusion down permanently. On one hand, this feels like a bit of a cop-out. On the other, well, it makes sense to put the most vulnerable part of the system in a place like that. For if the human is going to be struck there, they die anyways. The most common defensive move that a fighter can make is to cross their arms over their chest for a reason after all. The whole complaint tied to that is it just, well, the Navi emblems are kind of a big target to begin with. So making them the absolute weak points, it's so obvious it reaches the point of no one really thinking of it as that. With the target in mind, Neto goes on the attack, only to be attacked from behind by Blues, leading him being hit hard by the Prism Barrage. Enzan arrives and manages to distract Blues so Neto can finish the fight, but due to Goro's longer reach, he manages to hit Neto's chest emblem as well. Meaning while Goro's been saved, they are now out of operators and navies that can perform cross-fusion. The wrap-up. We have come to the dark side, for Goro Misaki and Prisman being forcibly infected by and then addicted to dark ships. We have drugs, not even once, for the same reason. We have Brawl for it all, for the fight to save Goro's soul from the dark aura infecting him. And we have still a better protagonist than Shinji Kido, for the show giving me an opportunity to once again play compare-contrast with the as-of-now third worst Kamen Rider protagonist ever. It's actually amazing and baffling I actually had to bump him down 2 rankings since I reviewed his show way back in 2015, but it was only in 2016 and 2018 that worse ones than him were created. He spent over 15 years being the gold standard for awful protagonists for a reason, and an example that everyone in the Japanese media industry used as what to avoid. To the point characters like him became the actual villains of a lot of stories after his. People may talk about how influential that series is, but not a lot have recognized that it was influential for all the wrong reasons, and everyone else did their best to call out or deliberately avoid doing everything that was wrong with it. Once more, this was a big, dramatic episode from Araki that ends the second arc of the series with one big dramatic loss that shifts the balance of the entire status quo for the series. One of the many shakeups this arc of the series has done to keep things interesting while still slowly whittling away at the forces of the Dark Lloyds, all while bringing Nebula into the light. But there's still a lot to do and see happen in the final 17 episodes of the season before it can come to its big finale, and we'll be starting to show how all that goes down soon enough.